Francisca González Navarro was born in 1966 in Santander, a small town in Murcia, Spain. She was raised in a devout Catholic family, with her parents, 2 sisters, and a brother. Life in Santander was steeped in religious traditions and conservative values. However, her family was not as happy as it appeared, as it was rumored that her father suffered from alcoholism, which had a lasting impact on her upbringing. Francisca has completed her basic education and is someone who pays great attention to her appearance. This focus on her looks became even more pronounced after a comment from her brother about her weight. According to Francisca's mother, she had several romantic relationships during her teenage years, including one with a wealthy foreigner. At 18, she met José Ruiz, and the two quickly began a romantic relationship. After nearly 2 years together, Francisca became pregnant, and they married in a civil ceremony in 1987. Their first child, José Carlos, was born shortly after. Francisca later revealed that during their courtship, her husband, José, had been involved in group encounters with escorts. Although he initially distanced himself from this lifestyle, it resurfaced after their marriage. He introduced her to partner swapping and visits to clubs catering to such activities. In 1996, 9 years after their civil wedding, they celebrated a formal Catholic ceremony with a large event. That same year, their second son, Francisco Miguel, was born, and 2 years later, in 1998, their third child, Adrián Leroy, arrived. As the family grows larger, family problems also increase. José worked as an international truck driver, often traveling for long periods, which left Francisca to manage the household alone. His frequent absences fueled her jealousy, leading her to track his movements, sometimes going as far as disguising herself and using taxis to follow him. Their relationship deteriorated, marked by frequent arguments, both over the phone and in person, some of which turned physical. Francisca later spoke of enduring psychological abuse. Feeling neglected, she coped by indulging in compulsive shopping, often buying clothes and lingerie in an attempt to regain her husband's attention. Her resentment deepened, and her mental health continued to crumble. She became dependent on alcohol and banned substances. Between 1990 and 1999, medical records documented Francisca's struggles with anxiety, insomnia, and anemia. During her mental breakdown, it was her children who suffered the most. She became harsh and physically abusive, a stark contrast to the supportive mother her children needed. By 2002, her eldest son, Carlos, then just 14, had taken on the responsibility of caring for his younger siblings. He managed their daily needs, including cooking and hygiene, while their home life grew increasingly chaotic. Despite the instability, no one could have foreseen the tragedy that was about to unfold. Francisca suspected that her husband, José, was being unfaithful. She followed him to an industrial park, where she thought she saw him with another woman. This suspicion proved to be the final straw in their already rocky marriage. When José announced he was leaving for a trucking job in France, Francisca ominously warned him that she would make him suffer more than he had ever hurt her. Although he departed, their arguments continued over the phone. Back at home, Francisca spiraled further into substance abuse. On Friday, January 18, 2002, Francisca stayed in bed, claiming to have flu symptoms, but later took her children to the park. That night, Carlos did his chores as usual, while the younger children, Francisco and Adrián, slept in bed with their mother. In the early hours of Saturday, January 19th, the house was jolted awake by the screams of Francisco and Adrián. Hearing the commotion, Carlos stayed in bed, assuming it was another instance of his mother's violent outbursts, a situation that had sadly become routine in their household. He had no idea of the horrifying reality unfolding. That morning, there were conflicting accounts of what happened. In one version, Carlos attempted to wake his younger brothers, only to find them unresponsive and lifeless. Panicked, he ran to inform nearby relatives while Francisca contacted the police. Another account suggests that Carlos was awakened by strange noises and discovered the tragic scene himself. A third version claims that Francisca woke him, alleging a robbery had taken place and urging him to call for help. When the authorities arrived, they encountered a horrifying and tragic scene. The two boys, Francisco and Adrian, were found in the master bed with visible signs of violence. Bruises and pressure marks suggested they had been asphyxiated. Investigators immediately began working to determine what had occurred during the night and to identify the person responsible. Francisca initially claimed that a group of Ecuadorian men had broken into the home through the balcony window with the intention of robbing it. She stated that she tried to defend her children using a can of pepper spray, but the intruders overpowered her, took the spray, and rendered her unconscious. She explained that this was why she was unable to protect her sons. In an interview, one of the officers noted that while Francisca appeared agitated, she did not seem deeply grief-stricken. Even more concerning was her effort to direct the officer's attention to specific details, raising suspicions that she might be attempting to influence the investigation. While Francisca and Carlos received psychological support from Murcia's social services, the police began gathering statements from extended family and neighbors. Once Francisca was physically stable, she was taken to a forensic institute for a medical evaluation. The purpose of this examination was to investigate her claim of being exposed to paralyzing gas and to assess the scratches on her face and wrists. Initial reports revealed that during her emergency call, Francisca repeatedly cried out that her children had been taken from her. Francisca's husband, Jose, who was abroad at the time, immediately returned to Santamra upon hearing the tragic news. Initially, Francisca claimed that intruders had killed her children and stolen some jewelry. She alleged that unfamiliar foreign men had been loitering near their house in the days before the incident, and she mentioned changing the door locks after discovering evidence of tampering. Francisca suggested to investigators that the attack might have been a warning or an act of revenge linked to her husband's alleged involvement in banned substance trafficking. However, her story began to unravel under scrutiny. As detectives pressed her for details, inconsistencies emerged. At first, she stated that two men had broken in, but later claimed it was just one. She asserted that the scratches on her face were from a struggle but also insisted that the attackers wore gloves. These contradictions raised suspicions, and after 12 hours of questioning, suspicion shifted toward her. Statements from her son, Carlos, and neighbors further undermined her account. They described her as emotionally unstable and prone to violent behavior. Additionally, the autopsy results contradicted her claims. The time of death for her sons, Francisco and Adrian, was determined to be between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m., several hours earlier than the time frame she had reported for the supposed burglary. Forensic evidence further incriminated Francisca. Tissue samples found under Francisco and Adrian's fingernails did not belong to them but were confirmed through DNA testing to match Francisca. Her medical examination also contradicted her claims of being sprayed unconscious. She exhibited no signs typically associated with exposure to such agents, such as throat or eye irritation or respiratory distress. The discovery of the missing jewelry only made Francisca's story less credible. The items were found hidden in the couch cushions, along with a blonde wig and €9,000 in cash, strongly indicating premeditation. Investigators also noted a significant detail provided by Carlos during initial interviews. On the evening before the murders, Francisca had asked him to buy batteries for his Walkman. This was later interpreted as a calculated move to ensure his room was filled with music, preventing him from hearing anything during the crime. She also instructed her housekeeper to come by the following morning, which investigators believed was an attempt to clean up evidence. In her written statement, Francisca claimed she had been exchanging text messages with her husband in the early morning hours. She said she heard glass breaking around sunrise. When she opened the bedroom door, she saw a man wearing gloves. She alleges that she tried to fight him off with a spray bottle and a knife hidden under the bed, but she claims he overpowered her and sprayed her until she passed out. When she regained consciousness, her children were dead and some jewelry was missing. However, investigators reconstructed the timeline and concluded that her account was implausible. The sequence of incidents she described could not have occurred within the brief time frame she outlined, further solidifying her guilt in the eyes of law enforcement. Although suspicions were mounting, the authorities did not immediately take Francisca into custody. She was permitted to attend the funeral, where she appeared grief-stricken and composed, standing alongside her distraught husband. However, just one day after the funeral, the police arrested her. The woman, who publicly mourned the deaths of her 2 children, is now charged as the prime suspect in the case. Jose and Carlos, shocked and disbelieving, watched as she was taken away in a police vehicle only 48 hours after Francisco and Adrian were buried. The image of heartbreak she had portrayed soon crumbled. During a formal interrogation, she broke down under pressure and confessed to having killed her 2 youngest sons, Francisco and Adrian. Even then, she attempted to minimize her responsibility. Francisca's defense was that a dangerous combination of alcohol, cocaine, and tranquilizers had impaired her judgment in the hours leading up to the tragedy. She claimed she woke up after 7 a.m., disoriented from the substances, and found her children lifeless beside her. In her statement, she said she wandered through the house searching for signs of an intruder. Finding no evidence of a break-in, she horrifyingly concluded that she had to be responsible. However, she quickly contradicted herself, saying she initially believed intruders had entered the house, blaming this belief on hallucinations caused by the drugs. The timeline constructed by investigators was harrowing. At around 2 a.m., Francisca reportedly went to her bedroom and first attacked her middle child, Francisco, strangling him with a mobile phone charger cable. The boy fought back, leaving scratches on her body, but she eventually overpowered him. She then turned to her youngest child, Adrian, and repeated the act. As the legal proceedings unfolded, Francisca's defense team requested her transfer to a psychiatric facility, which the court approved. Forensic psychiatrists evaluated her and described her as cold, manipulative, immature, and egocentric. They stated she craved attention, exhibited emotional instability, controlling behavior, and aggressive tendencies, and displayed paranoid and narcissistic personality traits. They also noted her lack of interest in maintaining social or familial harmony. Francisca, however, continued to portray herself as a victim. In her initial statement to the judge, she attributed her actions to years of psychological pain. She described 2001 as a year of profound emotional decline, claiming she endured humiliation, threats, and verbal abuse from her husband, Jose. She also alleged that he forced her to participate in partner-swapping clubs and had a year-long affair that ended shortly before the murders. She argued that her substance abuse stemmed from trauma and claimed that the family was in danger due to Jose's alleged involvement in prohibited substance trafficking. She recounted a specific incident in which a stranger pointed a weapon at Jose's head, stating that this terrifying moment had compelled her to prepare for an escape. According to her, this was the reason she purchased a blonde wig and hid €9,000 in cash, items that were later confiscated by the police. She insisted these were meant for an emergency, not a crime. Francisca denied planning the murders. She claimed that if she had intended to run away, she would have done so earlier. The idea of staging a robbery, she said, only came to her after she woke up to find her sons dead. She emphasized, not before. She insisted she never intended to harm her children, asserting she had no memory of the events due to a mix of 5 grams of cocaine, sleeping pills, and several glasses of whiskey. Francisca denied that the murders were intended to harm her husband, arguing that if she wanted to hurt him, she had easier and more effective ways to do so. Her husband, Jose, on the other hand, maintained a measured stance. He admitted to infidelity, acknowledged spending too much time away from home for work, and blamed himself for not recognizing the warning signs sooner. He noted how Francisca began smelling of alcohol and making small weekly withdrawals from their shared account. Despite everything, he insisted that she had loved him deeply and believed that she would never have harmed their children if not under the influence of prohibited substances and alcohol. He also revealed that he had once considered seeking psychiatric help for her, a decision he regretted not following through on. The case became further complicated when the local newspaper reported that Francisca was accused of having an affair with a businessman from Murcia. The man, whose identity was never disclosed, was described as someone she was deeply in love with, an admission that starkly contrasted with her obsessive monitoring of her husband. Investigators uncovered numerous phone calls between Francisca and this unidentified man in the days leading up to the murders, including one made just minutes after the crime took place. Although the details of the call were never revealed, some speculated that the affair could have driven her to seek revenge. However, she denied these allegations, claiming that the man never existed. She accused Jose of fabricating these stories to portray her as unstable and to discredit her claims of abuse. Amid persistent rumors and unanswered questions, Francisca remained in pre-trial detention until her trial began in October 2003. During the opening hearing, she claimed to have no memory of killing her children, attributing her actions to her intoxicated state on the night of the incident. She stated that she had tried to resuscitate her children when she found them unresponsive and described her subsequent panic, during which she sweat profusely and removed her pajamas. Once again, she blamed Jose, accusing him of threats and psychological abuse. Francisca also denied confessing to the crime during police interrogation. She claimed she was too intoxicated at the time to recall anything clearly, including whether she had been alone in the house on the night of the murders. Portraying herself as a caring mother, Francisca claimed that she had stopped using prohibited substances while in prison, although she admitted to being emotionally and mentally unfit for release. During the trial, Carlos, Francisca's eldest son, delivered heart-wrenching testimony. He recounted waking up that night to hear his younger brother shouting that they couldn't breathe. Assuming it was another instance of their mother's abusive behavior, a pattern they had tragically grown accustomed to, he did not intervene. The prosecution presented its case meticulously, arguing that Francisca had staged the crime scene to resemble a burglary. Forensic evidence indicated that she was fully aware of and in control of her actions. Although the defense acknowledged the deaths, they argued that her use of prohibited substances had impaired her judgment. The prosecution countered with psychiatric evaluations, which demonstrated that Francisca understood her actions and the lethal consequences of her behavior. The jury delivered a unanimous verdict. At the age of 37, Francisca Gonzalez Navarro was convicted of the premeditated murders of her two sons, Francisco and Adrian. The court ruled that her substance use did not diminish her culpability. Psychiatrists confirmed that she did not suffer from any mental disorder that would justify her criminal actions. She was sentenced to 2 consecutive 20-year prison terms, amounting to a total of 40 years, and was ordered to pay €200,000 in compensation to Jose Ruiz and €40,000 to Jose Carlos. Francisca began serving her sentence in the prison in Murcia. Her cold and emotionless demeanor left a chilling impression on many. Initially ostracized, she later gained some respect from fellow inmates due to her literacy and discipline. She began drafting legal documents for other prisoners in exchange for money, creating a niche for herself in the prison economy. Despite her difficult circumstances, she always kept herself neat, clean, and well-groomed. Shortly after her sentencing, she divorced Jose and was reportedly involved in relationships with at least 3 other incarcerated men. Over the years, Francisca was transferred between prisons but remained a model inmate. In 2016, she was granted temporary weekend leave. By July 2020, after nearly 17 years in custody, she was allowed to serve the remainder of her sentence under supervised release outside of prison. However, her freedom was short-lived. In April 2022, authorities discovered that she was not staying at the approved residence, leading to the revocation of her release. She was sent back to prison. Subsequent investigations determined that she had violated the conditions of her release by using prohibited substances. While she later regained some privileges, she was temporarily barred from any further leave. Meanwhile, Carlos continued living in the house where the murders had taken place. By 2022, he had started a family and was living there with his wife and 2 children, in the same home where he had tragically lost his 2 younger brothers. Although the house was on the market for a short period of time and the price was reduced significantly, there were still no interested buyers, so the house remained in the family. Jose, on the other hand, reportedly left Spain for a time after the tragedy but eventually returned, maintaining a low profile ever since. Meanwhile, Francisca remains in prison. There were rumors that she had married her defense attorney, however, these claims were denied. Her case is regarded as one of the most disturbing family crimes in Spain's history, not only because of the crime's brutality but also due to her cold rationalizations, inconsistent accounts, and unsettling composure. For many, it is unimaginable that a mother could plan and commit such a horrific crime. Whether she acted out of revenge, desperation, or delusion is something only Francisca truly knows. The question of whether she genuinely doesn't remember or simply chooses not to reveal the truth may never be answered. Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Maria Luisa. Maria Luisa was born on May 29, 1977, in La Fortuna, San Carlos, in Alajuela, Costa Rica. She was the youngest of 5 children in a humble family. From an early age, she was ambitious and determined. She wanted to help people and dreamed of becoming a doctor, telling herself she would be the first in her family to get a college degree. During her school years, she excelled in chemistry and biology, her favorite subjects. After graduating in 1994, she was accepted into the country's most prestigious medical school, located in San Jose. As a student, Maria moved to the capital and lived there for the rest of her life. However, she still maintains a close relationship with her family, visiting and get in touch with them. In 2000, after earning her degree, Maria began working as an anesthesiologist at one of the largest medical centers in the capital. She quickly excelled in her career, continuously learning and honing her skills. By 2015, she had risen to become the head of the anesthesiology and recovery therapy department. She was highly respected and admired by her colleagues, become a famous doctor. However, to achieve success, Maria had to trade in her personal life. For many years, she was alone, fully dedicated to her work. In 2017, at the age of 40, she started dating a doctor at the same hospital, though he worked in a different department. She believed he was her true love and someone with whom she could build a happy family. Unfortunately, at the start of 2020, their relationship ended, and he started dating a younger co-worker. The breakup was a painful experience for Maria. She suffered from severe depression and focused only on work for months, barely paying attention to the world around her. Her only source of comfort was her small dog, Mafalda, she loved and cared for as if he were her child. In July 2020, Maria felt like she needed some time off and change your living environment to relax your mind. She decided to visit the coast and stay at a small, cozy hotel called La Mansion Inn, located in the picturesque Punta Arenas region. Before, this resort attracted tourists from around the world, but now this place is very deserted. At the hotel, only a few rooms were occupied, which provided the peace and quiet Maria was seeking. She planned to spend the weekend there and return home on Monday, bringing her beloved dog Mafalda along with her. Maria stayed in a room on the ground floor, has a second door leading to a private yard. These rooms are designed for guests with pets, so it can go outside and relieve themselves in a designated area. At the time, all the other rooms with courtyard access were unoccupied. On July 18, Maria arrived, left her belongings in her room, and went to the beach. The following day was equally uneventful. She walked along the shore, relaxed in the sun, had dinner at a restaurant, and returned to her room. That evening, she called her mother, and they talked for about 30 minutes. During the call, Maria remarked on how empty the hotel felt, with only a handful of staff members. She intended to check out the next morning, after breakfast, but she never did. On the morning of July 20, Maria did not come down for breakfast. The hotel staff noticed her absence, as there were very few guests, but assumed she was simply sleeping. However, when checkout time arrived, and she still hadn't appeared, they decided to check her room. 2 staff members knocked on her door but received no response. They could hear her dog barking inside, which confirmed she was there. Despite repeatedly knocking and calling her name, the only sound was the dog's barking. Concerned, they went to the courtyard to see if they could access her room from another entrance. They found the second door unlocked and decided to go inside to see what was going on. As soon as they stepped inside, they noticed brownish stains on the floor, resembling dried blood. On the bed, they discovered a body wrapped in a sheet. The staff immediately contacted emergency services and informed hotel management. Unfortunately, when paramedics arrived, they confirmed that Maria was dead. She had been killed several hours before her body was discovered. The scene was deeply unsettling, from the condition of the room to the circumstances surrounding her death. Maria's body showed multiple cuts, bruises, and bite marks inflicted by different individuals. Defensive wounds on her hands indicated she had fought back desperately. The cause of death was determined to be mechanical asphyxia and a broken neck. She had been strangled with such force that her cervical vertebrae were fractured. The autopsy confirmed that Maria had been sexually assaulted before her death. Beside her bed, there was a bottle of mineral water, an opened bottle of expensive wine, and 2 glasses. According to hotel staff, she had ordered these items the previous night, but she was alone at the time. Maria's keycard records show that after she received the items, she did not leave the room and no one entered. However, the glass door leading to the courtyard did not require a key, which could have allowed the attacker to gain access. The hotel had several security cameras that could have helped shed some light on the matter, but it turned out they had all been out of service for months. The hotel management explained that they had cut costs by shutting off the cameras. Forensic experts analyzed the bite marks on Maria's body for DNA, expecting to find the attacker's saliva. However, the results were shocking. The saliva belonged to Maria herself. Since the bite marks were located on her face, neck, and chest, areas she could not have reached herself, investigators deduced that the attacker had deliberately placed her saliva on the wounds to conceal their own DNA. Another disturbing detail revealed by the pathologist was that Maria's body had been thoroughly cleaned after her death. This indicated that after torturing, strangling, and killing her, the attackers washed her body in the bathroom, placed her back on the bed, contaminated the bite marks with her saliva, and wrapped her body in a sheet. Because the hotel's cameras were not working and the grounds were very deserted, no witnesses could be identified. Both guests and hotel staff reported that they did not see anything unusual, and they did not see any strangers appearing on the premises. The brutal murder of Maria, a famous anesthesiologist, quickly became the focus of national attention, causing great public outrage. Police are under pressure to investigate and find the culprit who committed the brutal act against an innocent woman. When asked if Maria might have had a brief romance during the trip, her family firmly denied it. She was still heartbroken over a recent breakup and had been hoping for reconciliation. Regarding the 2 glasses found in the room, Maria's sister explained that she always used 2 glasses, one for wine and one for water. Forensic analysis confirmed this explanation, as only Maria's fingerprints and lip marks were found on the glasses. During their interview with the police, her mother suddenly remembered something from her daughter's last phone call. Maria had mentioned chatting with a man who worked at the hotel during lunch. She said he had asked her why she was traveling alone and how long she planned to stay. This detail provided detectives with their first suspect to investigate. The employee in question was 38 years old, Teodoro Herrera, the son of a close friend of the hotel owner, Harry Bodan. In fact, thanks to his father's connection with Harry, he got the job at the hotel. He worked as a bartender and also ran personal errands for Harry. During his interview with the police, he behaved oddly. He was extremely nervous. He claimed that he did not know Maria and did not remember ever speaking to her. Detectives noticed fresh scratches on Teodoro's cheeks and neck, for which he couldn't provide a clear explanation. When asked to remove his shirt, similar scratches were found on his chest and shoulders. Investigators suspected these marks were left by Maria as she fought for her life, but they needed forensic confirmation. He was arrested and held for 6 months while the investigation continued. Forensic analysis later confirmed that blood and skin particles from Teodoro were found under Maria's nails. However, the bite marks on her body did not match his dental impressions. The investigation then shifted focus to a 36-year-old man named Luis Carlos Miranda. He was not a regular guest or employee at La Mansion Inn, but he was a friend of the hotel owner, Harry, and often stayed there for free. One of the bite marks on Maria's body was potentially linked to he, though it wasn't conclusive. Still, the police arrested him as a second suspect and detained him for 6 months, just like Teodoro. He also denied ever meeting Maria or having any interaction with her. About 10 days after the murder, a third suspect was arrested, Harry Baudin, the 69-year-old hotel owner. Harry, a businessman of Dutch origin, was well connected with politicians. He owned multiple properties across different countries. His arrest was prompted by a bite mark on Maria's body that matched his dental impressions. Investigators also discovered that about 6 months before the murder, he had undergone surgery at the hospital where Maria worked. Although he claimed he had never met her, police suspected he might have noticed her during his hospital stay, obtained her contact information, and lured her to his hotel. Initially, Harry was placed under house arrest due to his age and health problems. However, when he moved to a new residence without informing the authorities, he was taken into custody over concerns he might attempt to flee the country. Another individual connected to the case was Harry's husband, Yater Daniel Abanda. However, no evidence was found to convict him. He denied any involvement, stating that Harry had been unwell that night and had not left their room. After reviewing the autopsy and forensic results, investigators determined that there were 3 attackers involved. There were no signs of ropes or restraints used to hold down Maria, but all her limbs displayed bruises consistent with being pinned by hands. Fabric fibers and a thread were discovered inside her mouth, indicating she had been gagged. This likely explains why none of the other guests or staff heard her screams, although her injuries and signs of torture showed that she must have been desperately calling for help. On Maria's phone, found in her room, there were messages to her sister in which she praised the hotel. She described it as beautiful, cozy, and quiet, complimenting the staff for being attentive. She also mentioned spending the evening chatting and dancing at the bar with the man who served coffee, identified as Teodoro. From the start, Teodoro was the main suspect. He was the only suspect of the 3 with visible scratches, and forensic evidence revealed his skin and blood under Maria's fingernails. Additionally, his DNA was found on her body, despite his attempts to wash it off. However, dental cast comparisons showed that his teeth did not match the bite marks on her skin. After returning to her room, Maria stayed in her room all evening and didn't allow anyone inside. Investigators suspected the attackers entered through the door leading to the courtyard. It's possible she left the door unlocked for her dog to go outside. Since the neighboring rooms were unoccupied, no one would have noticed. Once inside, the attackers acted quickly. They struck Maria on the head, rendering her unconscious, gagged her, and then subjected her to hours of torture and assault. Afterward, they strangled her with such force that her neck was broken. They then washed her body in the bathroom, placed it on the bed, and wrapped it in a sheet, dirtying the bite wound with her saliva. During the trial, all 3 suspects, Teodoro, Harry, and Luis, denied involvement, claiming they were asleep in their rooms that night. However, no witnesses could corroborate their alibis. Investigators found disturbing text messages on their phones in which they shared frightening thoughts. The day before the crime, they even discussed a guest who was alone. The trial is set for September 2022, more than 2 years after the murder. Harry, 71, had to appear in court in a wheelchair because of worsening knee problems that made it difficult for him to walk. The prosecution immediately had difficulty proving Harry and Luis's involvement in the crime. The evidence against them was largely circumstantial, consisting of text messages and dental impressions. The defense argued that the bite marks should be dismissed as evidence, because they did not perfectly match their dental records. To support this argument, Harry's lawyer hired an orthodontist from Madrid to testify. After analyzing the bite marks on Maria's body, orthodontist concluded that they were insufficient as evidence and could not definitively establish a link between Harry, Luis, and the crime. However, after orthodontist returned to Spain the following day, the prosecution questioned his credentials. Further investigation confirmed that he did not have a valid certificate and was merely a self-proclaimed expert. As a result, his testimony was discredited and thrown out. Despite this, the prosecution was determined to prove a connection between Harry, Luis, and the case. They argued that the brutal, calculated nature of the assault and murder indicated the involvement of at least 3 people. The defense denied this claim, insisting that a healthy individual was perfectly capable of performing the act without assistance. The verdict was delivered with clear and undeniable evidence, all pointing to Teodoro Herrera as the culprit. His DNA was found in Maria's body, his skin cells appeared under her fingernails, and her blood was discovered both on the outside and inside of his shoes. The shoe prints matched those found at the entrance of her room and near the bed. Consequently, he was convicted on all charges and sentenced to 50 years in prison without the possibility of parole. At 40 years old, this effectively amounted to a life sentence. He admitted to being intimate with Maria that night, but claimed it was consensual and insisted someone else must have killed her after he left. In contrast, there was insufficient evidence against Harry and Luis. Apart from bite marks and text messages, nothing concrete linked them to the crime. As a result, they were acquitted and released in March 2023. However, in September of the same year, an appeals court revisited the case after a complaint from Maria's family and ordered it to be reopened. By then, Harry and Luis had already fled Costa Rica, leaving the country immediately after their release. They are currently living in the Netherlands, and even if the trial is reopened and they are found guilty, they will not face any consequences because the Netherlands and Costa Rica do not have an extradition treaty, even though this is a very serious crime. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Victoria Nasirova. On September 2, 2016, police received a call from Olga Zvik, 35, a Ukrainian immigrant who worked as a beautician, who reported that several valuables had gone missing from her bedroom. She explained to police that she had recently been to the hospital, where she experienced severe dizziness and nausea, with occasional loss of consciousness. Even after returning home, she continued to appear distracted. During the investigation, the police conducted a detailed interrogation of Olga. She recalled a recent troubling encounter with a client named Victoria Nasirova, who came to her home and insisted on urgent eyelash extensions. Victoria had been in contact with the salon before and often acted as if she and Olga were friends. However, on that day, Victoria asked to come to Olga's home to get eyelash extensions. Olga explained that she only worked at the salon and did not accept home customers, but Victoria deliberately ignored her explanation and insisted on urgent eyelash extensions, and Olga finally agreed. Olga later told the police that Victoria had tried to ask her out several times, but she had refused. Another notable detail was that Victoria looked very similar to Olga, which often made Olga feel uncomfortable. During the investigation, it was discovered that Victoria had shown up at Olga's apartment with 3 pieces of cheesecake from the best local bakery. Victoria ate 2 and insisted that Olga have a third, to which Olga eventually agreed. After a brief tea party with cheesecakes, Olga felt unwell. Once Victoria left, Olga became extremely nauseous and lost consciousness for about 30 minutes. When she woke up, she called 911 and was taken to the hospital by ambulance. However, the doctors found nothing wrong in her blood tests. Upon returning home, Olga discovered that some of her valuables were missing and reported the theft to the police. Police were initially skeptical of her story, suspecting that Olga may have been under the influence of drugs, which were causing her to hallucinate. Her unusual behavior and appearance contributed to their suspicions. Police concluded that her account of the incident, including her reference to a woman who resembled her, was likely fabricated. Olga firmly denied using drugs and presented her argument convincingly. She believed that her issues stemmed from a piece of cheesecake she had eaten, suggesting it might have been poisoned. The police quickly inspected the scene and discovered a box from a local bakery in the trash. Olga identified the box as the cheesecake Victoria had brought. The police collected it as evidence because it still had crumbs left inside. Analysis of the cheesecake could determine whether it was the cause of Olga's problems. The examination of the cheesecake revealed no abnormalities. Despite this, the Olga insisted that the dessert was the reason for her illness. She mentioned that she had visited the hospital, where doctors examined her but found nothing unusual. In response to inquiries about her condition and the tests conducted, police contacted the hospital. However, the doctors declined to share information due to privacy policies. The police interpreted this refusal as further evidence to doubt the Olga's claims. Additionally, they could not locate the client mentioned by Olga, leading to a postponement of the case until more information becomes available. A neighbor provided details after noticing a suspicious woman near Olga's apartment the following day. The woman appeared several times, lingering around Olga's apartment until she encountered the neighbor. The strange woman said that her friend Olga was sick and then left in a hurry. Concerned, the neighbor noticed that Olga's apartment door was open and decided to check on her. When she entered, the neighbor found the apartment uncomfortably hot, with the heating system on full blast despite the hot summer weather. Olga was alive but unconscious in bed, dressed strangely, in a revealing bra and sweatpants. The police felt that someone had deliberately changed her clothes. Scattered around her were powerful pills, suggesting that Olga may have taken them with the intention of ending her life. The neighbor quickly called 911, describing the strange woman as dark-haired, attractive, and very similar to Olga. After receiving new information, the police were convinced that the woman who resembled Olga was real and not a figment of Olga's imagination. Therefore, the police intensified their efforts to investigate the case. The police suspected that Victoria Nasirova, who was involved in a cheesecake in the previous case, was involved in this case. The police began searching for Victoria, but they had no clues or even any photos of her. However, a private investigator, who had been monitoring Victoria's activities for a long time, tracked Victoria down on the internet and contacted the police. He located Victoria, where she was advertising her escort services on a dating website and social media. The private investigator suspected that she used these platforms to find victims for her crimes. Her methods were effective. Victoria would meet her victims, drug them with psychotropic substances to render them unconscious, and then steal their valuables. Meanwhile, Olga eventually recovered from her traumatic experience. After leaving the hospital, she shared her story of poisoning on social media. Soon after, one of her clients mentioned a man named Ruben Barakov who had gone through a similar situation. Ruben owned a dry cleaning business and had met a woman named Victoria on a Russian dating site a few months before Olga suffered cheese poisoning. Victoria had invited Ruben to her home, bragging about her cooking skills. He accepted the invitation, but as soon as he tasted her food, he passed out. Victoria then rummaged through his pockets, taking an expensive watch, cash, and cards. Ruben was under the influence of a powerful psychoactive substance and truly believed that it had nearly killed him. Victoria then took him to a dry cleaner's. She explained to Ruben's colleagues that he was drunk and she left. When Ruben regained consciousness, he realized that he had been robbed. The private investigator suspected the situation was much more serious, and that the two victims were lucky to be alive. In 2017, he worked with a client from Russia who asked him to help track down a dangerous criminal. Nadia Ford contacted the private investigator after her biological mother, Alla Alexienko, went missing. Nadia currently lives in New York, USA, but was born in Russia. Nadia, who is from Krasnodar, was raised by her mother, Alla, who worked hard to provide for her children. Nadia had dreamed of living in the United States since she was a child, and her dream came true when she came to study in America in 2007. While there, she met a man, married him, and took his last name, Ford. However, their marriage did not last, and they eventually divorced. Nadia chose to stay in the United States and successfully built her life there. She kept a close relationship with her mother, Alla, who was living alone at the time. Alla sold her house and then moved to a new apartment. In early 2013, after moving into a new apartment, Alla had a new neighbor named Victoria Nasirova. Despite the significant age difference, Victoria quickly became friends with Alla. Alla shared stories about her daughter's life in the United States, which sparked Victoria's interest in visiting America and meeting Nadia. Alla then arranged for them to meet. In September 2013, Victoria went to New York, where she met Nadia, and they became close friends. Nadia was a kind and pleasant woman. Victoria sought her advice on how to stay in the United States, and Nadia shared a few tips. However, Victoria's plans did not work out, and she eventually returned to Russia. Despite this, she maintained a close relationship with Alla. In the fall of 2014, Victoria planned another trip to the United States, and she told Alla that she could help send gifts to Nadia. Trusting Victoria, Alla happily agreed. Alla then brought $6,000 in cash and valuables, including 2 expensive mink coats, to send to Nadia. Victoria then repeatedly postponed her trip to the United States for various reasons, leaving Alla worried about whether she would actually go and what would happen to her gifts. Worried, Alla called her daughter Nadia to express her concerns. Nadia reassured her mother and suggested that she ask Victoria to return her belongings. On October 4, 2014, Alla called Nadia with the good news that she had finally spoken to Victoria, who agreed to return her valuables. However, this never happened, and Alla soon disappeared. Nadia kept calling her mother, but she didn't answer. This was unusual, since they were in contact every day. Worried, Nadia contacted Victoria to ask about her mother. Victoria confirmed that she had seen Alla, and they had talked and had tea together. Victoria then left, never saw Alla again. Victoria mentioned that Alla was planning to go somewhere, but she didn't know where. Victoria also tried to contact Alla, and even visited Alla's apartment to check on her, but there was no sign of her mother being home. Alla was still unreachable. After a few days, Nadia and her brother received a number of unusual text messages from an unknown number, supposedly from their mother Alla. The messages stated that there was no need to look for her because she was happy. However, the way the messages were written was inconsistent with Alla's style, which raised their concerns. Nadia realized that something was definitely wrong and decided to book the next flight to Russia to assist in the investigation into her mother's disappearance. Upon arriving in Krasnodar, Nadia went to her mother's apartment, but it was stripped of valuables that Victoria was supposed to return. There was no trace of her mother. Concerned, Nadia quickly contacted the police and reported her mother's disappearance. She informed the police about her suspicions regarding Victoria, a neighbor of her mother who had become suspiciously close to her and failed to return Alla belongings. It soon became clear that Victoria had a motive to harm Alla. The police were interested in the information and devised a plan. Nadia called Victoria and pressed Victoria for information about her mother's whereabouts. Victoria, angered by Nadia's questions, shouted that her mother was still alive, but Victoria did not know where she was. The police, who had been listening in on the call, decided to approach Victoria. At her home, she successfully convinced the police that she was not involved and claimed that Nadia's accusations were baseless, with no evidence against her. Meanwhile, Nadia returned to her mother's apartment to investigate. She noticed that the place was surprisingly clean, with no dust, as if it had just been thoroughly cleaned, despite her mother's absence for several days. This raised questions for Nadia. Who could have cleaned the apartment? Additionally, she discovered that several valuable items, including jewelry and $50,000 in cash, were missing. Concerned, Nadia decided to report this to the police. The police, after speaking with Victoria, tried to persuade her that her mother had taken the money and jewelry on a trip and would be back soon. However, Nadia did not buy this explanation. She sensed that her mother was in danger and that it had something to do with Victoria. Nadia reached out to all her mother's friends and relatives, but no one knew where her mother was. In her desperation, Nadia printed flyers with her mother's photo and posted them all over the neighborhood. She also drove around the city, visiting her mother's favorite places, but her efforts were unproductive. Nadia contacted Victoria, begging her to return her mother and expressing her willingness to do anything, even offer a reward. However, Victoria denied any involvement. Despite this, Nadia remained hopeful that her mother was still alive and continued to search. She regularly went to the police for updates, but there was no information about her mother. Determined to find answers, Nadia hired a private investigator. After investigating, the private investigator discovered that Victoria had rented a car from a service center on the day Alla went missing. He checked the car's information and reviewed surveillance camera footage from October 5, 2014. The videos show a car driving on a highway outside the city. There were two people inside, Victoria, who was driving, and Alla Alexinko, motionless in the front passenger seat. She shared this information with the police, who confirmed that Victoria had rented the car and brought her in for questioning. Victoria admitted that she had driven the rental car that morning, October 5, but she denied that there was anyone else in the car with her. Victoria agreed to take a lie detector test. After completing the test, she was released, but the results later showed that she had failed, leading the police to consider her a prime suspect in the case. Before the police could arrest her, Victoria fled the country without notifying the police. They began searching for Victoria. Nadia remained in Russia for another 6 months to assist in the investigation, holding out hope that her mother was still alive. She also contacted Interpol for help in finding Victoria. Police traced the rental car to a dense forest in Armavir, which turned out to be Victoria's hometown. This is where the search for Alla began. Nadia's hopes of her mother's safe return were dashed in April 2015, when police informed her of the tragic news. Her charred remains were found in the same forest, about a 3-hour drive from where Alla went missing. Nadia was able to identify her mother through her dental records, as the rest of her body was badly burned and unrecognizable. The cause of death could not be determined. Following the identification, an arrest warrant was issued for Victoria Nasirova, and her case was referred to Interpol. After her mother's funeral in Krasnodar, Nadia returned to the United States. She found it difficult to cope with her mother's death and was unable to work for a long period. Eventually, she gathered her strength and made a promise to her mother that she would seek justice and ensure that those responsible for Alla's death would be punished. One day, Nadia discovered a photo of Victoria on social media. The wanted woman was showing off her lavish lifestyle in Mexico. After discovering this, Nadia contacted the U.S. police to report Victoria's whereabouts, and they began an investigation. At this point, Nadia hired one of the top private detectives in the United States to speed up the investigation. A wealthy friend of Nadia covered the cost of the detective's services, which she could not afford since she had not been working for several months while searching for her mother. The private detective thoroughly examined Victoria's social media photos and was able to confirm that she was already in the U.S. One of the selfies, taken while wearing sunglasses, showed a reflection of a car's dashboard. After examining hundreds, even thousands of cars, the private investigator determined it was a Chrysler 300. The private investigator was able to determine that the last photos were taken in Sheepshead Bay, a neighborhood in Brooklyn, New York. By checking a database of cars in that area, he was able to narrow down his search and identify a suspect. He discovered that Victoria was living with her boyfriend in an apartment complex just 5 blocks from Nadia, and that the Chrysler was registered to her new boyfriend. Victoria was probably unaware that the case had escalated to the point where Interpol had a global warrant for her arrest, which is why she felt safe posting her photos online. The private investigator located the boyfriend and contacted him. It was discovered that he had been poisoned by Victoria. She followed her usual methods of poisoning her boyfriend and even poisoned his beagle, which unfortunately died. Victoria's freedom poses a danger, as her potential victims could increase. The police searched Victoria's apartment and discovered Olga Tzvik's identity card. This discovery sheds light on why Olga was targeted by Victoria. Victoria needed money and valuables, but she also needed an ID that. With her temporary visa about to expire, she was looking to use someone else's ID to avoid returning to Russia, where she would have to stand trial. Police believe she intended to kill Olga, the real owner of the passport, to steal their identity. Fortunately, Olga survived thanks to the quick action of a neighbor. Additionally, the box containing the remains of the cheesecake was sent for analysis, marking a significant breakthrough in the investigation. The investigation returned to the lab, where researchers analyzed the cheesecake. It was determined that Victoria had used a sedative, but she had used a higher dose, which rendered her victims unconscious. Olga was lucky to survive after eating the cheesecake. The high temperature in her apartment was no accident. Heat amplifies the effects of the drug and can even be fatal. Victoria apparently knew this, so she increased the temperature in the house and tried to dress Olga in warmer clothes. But luckily, Olga was discovered by neighbors in time. After her arrest, Victoria denied all allegations against her, including the murder of Alla, who was Nadia's mother. She also rejected claims that she attempted to murder Olga Tzvik and other victims. Victoria had previously been a suspect in the theft of 2 fur items in May 2016, but that case did not progress. Additional incidents emerged involving her in thefts, where she would meet men online, visit their homes, drug them, and rob them. Most of the men chose not to report these crimes to the police due to concerns about publicity, allowing Victoria to evade consequences. The trial was delayed for a long time. The case finally went to court in January 2023, attracting considerable media and public attention. Victoria chose not to testify at the trial and remained silent. The court could not discuss the details of Alla's death because it happened in another country. Victoria's defense argued that there was no evidence that Victoria had poisoned the cheesecake and forced Olga to eat it. Victoria herself ate 2 pieces in front of Olga and had no problems. The prosecution then argued that Victoria had only added poison to 1 piece of cheesecake, specifically the 3rd piece she offered Olga. She ate the other 2 pieces without the poison. This misled Olga. After a lengthy deliberation, the jury found Victoria Nasirova guilty of 2nd-degree murder. Although the maximum sentence for the crime is 25 years, the judge shortened her sentence to 21 years. By law, she could apply for parole after serving 15 years. Victoria faced harsh prison life. She frequently complained about poor food and inadequate medical care. During her incarceration, she was attacked, leaving her scarred and nearly blind. After the attack, Victoria sued the prison, alleging that guards were negligent in failing to support her. The case ended in a $325,000 settlement. In a recent interview from prison, Victoria denied any wrongdoing, including Alla's murder. She claimed that she had nothing to do with poisoning beautician Olga with the cheesecake, explaining that she had eaten the cheesecake herself and had not become ill. Victoria said that she had only shared a piece of cheesecake with Olga and had not forced her to eat it. After completing her prison sentence in the United States, Victoria will be deported to Russia, where she will face trial for Alla's murder. Her daughter Nadia said she was relieved that Victoria was in prison and would not be able to escape justice. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Rocio Waninkoff. Hilaria Alicia Hornos was born on December 2, 1952, in the rural province of Jaén, Spain, specifically in the city of Arroyo del Ojanco. At the age of 24, she fell in love and married Willem Waninkoff, a Dutch citizen. They had 3 children, a son, Guillermo, followed by 2 daughters, Rosa and Rocio. However, as their family grew, so did the strain on their marriage. Willem suffered from alcoholism, which led to frequent absences from home and eventually led to his losing his job. Their arguments escalated, with Willem sometimes raising his voice at Alicia and becoming aggressive. To support her family, Alicia took a job as a maid at a hotel in Ibiza. During this difficult period, she met Dolores, who was the director of the hotel where she worked. Dolores Vasquez was the daughter of immigrants from Galicia. She is highly educated and polite, and a very interesting conversationalist. A strong friendship developed between Alicia and Dolores, which later developed into a romantic relationship. A year after starting her relationship with Dolores, Alicia decided to divorce Willem. He then returned to the Netherlands, and Alicia moved in with Dolores. Soon after, the couple bought a new house in Malaga. After the divorce, Alicia gained custody of all 3 children and raised them with Dolores. All 3 of Alicia's children loved Dolores, and the 5 of them lived together as a family. In 1988, Alicia and Dolores chose to end their romantic relationship, but continued to live together as friends until 1994. After 11 years, they parted ways, and Alicia began dating a man named Juan Charillo. She moved into a new place and embraced her new romantic life. With her children grown and her new partner by her side, life felt vibrant and full of love. On the morning of October 10, 1999, Alicia discovered that her daughter, Rocio, was missing. Initially, she wasn't alarmed, thinking Rocio might have spent the night at her boyfriend's house or a friend's place. However, as the day went on and Rocio still had not returned, Alicia grew worried. The family reached out to Rocio's friends and boyfriend, hoping to find out where she was, but no one had seen her. On the evening of October 9th, Rocio left home around 5:30 p.m. after saying goodbye to her mother and older sister, Rosa. She was headed to a fair in Fuengirola with her boyfriend, Antonio, and her friends. Rocio lived in the La Tierra neighborhood, which was very close to Antonio's house. She spent time at his place until 10:30 p.m. and planned to return home briefly to shower and change before heading to the fair. Unfortunately, she never arrived home. Although Alicia was worried about her daughter Rocio's disappearance, she chose to go for a walk with Juan instead of contacting the police immediately. While walking down the street, Alicia noticed a large blood stain on the road. She pointed it out to Juan, who initially didn't think much of it. However, as they got closer, Alicia noticed her daughter's sneakers lying there with drops of blood on them. Alicia was very panicked, and while walking, they also discovered a napkin and some blood on a vacant lot next to the path Rocio often walked. Alicia immediately called the police, and a missing person report was filed with a detailed description of Rocio. She had long hair, brown eyes, and was last seen wearing a white Nike t-shirt and purple pants. Police quickly arrived at the scene where the blood was found and forensic officers conducted a forensic examination of the crime scene to determine whose blood was on the road and sneakers. Initially, the investigation suggested that there had been an assault or fight that resulted in injuries. The trail showed several bloodstains, including long ones that looked like someone had moved quickly, possibly running. Eventually, the bloodstains disappeared, but the search team discovered a large trail that suggested significant blood loss. They also discovered bloody footprints. These led to tire tracks, where the bloodstains stopped. Next to the tire tracks, they found a cigarette butt from a brand that is not common in Spain. Forensic teams have collected all relevant samples to assist in the investigation, and it is hoped that DNA from these samples will help identify people who were at the scene. A detailed investigation was conducted, along with analysis of the blood found at the scene. Although the search for Rocio continues, police believe it is highly likely that Rocio was murdered. The blood trail began on the sidewalk and led to a large pool of blood, indicating significant blood loss that likely led to her death. Nearby, there were drag marks near the tire. This tire was identified from a small car, specifically a tire model that was discontinued in 1993. Since the drag marks extended over a steep area, it can be concluded that at least 2 people moved the body before a vehicle later arrived to remove the body. The search for Rocio continued, with volunteers scouring the area on foot and on motorbikes. Flyers with Rocio's picture were widely distributed, and news channels reported extensively on Rocio's disappearance. The family actively cooperated with journalists to get the word out about Rocio. Reporters from all television channels gathered outside Rocio Vaninkoff's home, hoping for her safe return. However, as time passed, the search yielded no clues. A few days after Rocio's disappearance, a local taxi driver came to the police station with vital information. He reported that on the night of Rocio's disappearance, around 10 p.m., he narrowly avoided a collision with an SUV traveling at high speed in the opposite lane, near where Rocio's sneakers were found on the side of the road. As he passed the car, he also heard a loud scream. This evidence strongly suggested that Rocio had been abducted and murdered by an unknown assailant. DNA analysis later confirmed that the blood found on the road belonged to Rocio. The news left her family devastated, and the sense of loss quickly spread, affecting not only Rocio's loved ones, but the entire country of Spain. On November 2, 1999, 25 days after Rocio's disappearance, a disfigured body, believed to be Rocio's, was discovered near the Los Altos del Rodeo Athletic Club, between Marbella and San Pedro de Alcantara. The body was partially obscured by bushes and leaves, lying behind a fence separating a residential area from a nearby highway. The body was found on a narrow road that was difficult for cars to access. Rocio's body was found in another town. When police arrived, they found the body severely decomposed. During the collection of evidence, large black garbage bags containing Rocio's clothing were found. One of the bags had the number 8 painted on it, suggesting that the bags had been reused rather than purchased specifically for transporting the body. Police found clothing that they believed might belong to the missing Rocio. Her sister Rosa identified several rings, 2 t-shirts, and other items in 2 trash bags near the body as belonging to Rocio. The t-shirts had been torn from stab wounds. Rocio's body was then taken to the laboratory for forensic analysis, where experts worked carefully, applying their knowledge and skills. They faced a difficult task due to the severe decomposition of the body. Decomposition occurs much more quickly in rain and high temperatures, especially when there is humidity. The objective was to gather additional evidence to aid the investigation and understand how the attack happened. Several closed wounds were discovered, along with 8 stab wounds on the Rocio's back. Experts believe the attack was swift and violent, suggesting the Rocio was either restrained or unable to defend themselves. Fingerprints were found on plastic bags at the scene where the body was located. The police already had fingerprints and tire tracks from a vehicle, and they also collected 2 tissue samples from Rocio's body, At that stage, there was insufficient evidence to identify a specific suspect, but the investigation had gathered some information and leads. Public pressure had a significant impact on the investigation, prompting police to quickly search for evidence, but they were unable to. Because Rocio body was so badly decomposed, they were unable to determine whether she had been sexually assaulted. Police speculated that the crime was motivated by personal vendetta and deep anger, suggesting that the attacker may have been an acquaintance or someone very close to Rocio. After collecting evidence, the police conducted further interviews. First, they questioned Rocio's boyfriend, Antonio Hurat, who was the last person to see her alive and was supposed to see her that night. He gave an alibi, saying he had fallen asleep at home and had not attended the fair that day. The police also questioned all of Rocio's relatives and friends, but each had a solid alibis. A year after Rocio Waninkoff's death, the police had narrowed down the number of suspects, and by the end of that year, they had identified a prime suspect, Dolores Vasquez. There was no evidence against Dolores, but the media led people to believe that Dolores was guilty. Dolores was the lover of Alicia, Rocio's mother. Unfortunately, journalists distorted and even fabricated the story, claiming that Alicia had accused Dolores from the first day after Rocio's death. In reality, their relationship had ended 4 years before the crime. The investigation followed the media story, focusing only on Dolores and creating a motive in the case. People speculated that Rocio may have interfered with the romantic relationship between the two. Many believed that if Rocio had not intervened, Alicia would have returned to Dolores. It was implied that Dolores had acted out of revenge against Rocio. The media and public were quick to accuse Dolores of murder when she was arrested, although she did not confess to any of the crimes. The local community was certain of her guilt, largely because police suspected that the killer was someone close to Rocio. Family members described Dolores as aggressive, violent, and extremely jealous. Alicia, meanwhile, told reporters that Dolores was both vengeful and cruel. Dolores was widely criticized by the public. Her unconventional lifestyle was a target during the trial, as it was considered unusual in Spain. The media portrayed her as a violent and cold-blooded woman who had spent 4 years plotting her hate crimes. The trial attracted a large crowd gathered outside the courthouse. Journalists have widely reported that a close family friend has been charged with Rocio's murder. Dolores is unpopular and faces an uphill battle in court. Public opinion matters in this case. Rumors and sensational media reports are likely to sway the jury's opinion. Virtually every television station has portrayed Dolores Vasquez as responsible for Rocio's death. In reality, there was no evidence against Dolores. However, it seemed that the justice system felt the need to convict someone and chose her as a scapegoat due to her questionable alibi and various flaws. Dolores was not present at the crime scene. The tire tracks did not match her car, the fabric fibers found did not come from her clothes, and the fingerprints on the trash bags did not belong to her. She also had an alibi, stating that she was babysitting her sick mother and her young niece that day, but this was ignored. Over 50 witnesses were called to testify in court. Dolores only took the stand once and stated that she did not kill Rocio and that she did not even see her that day. She asked all of Spain to find the real culprit because it was not her, and that person could have been in the courtroom at the time. She stated that there was no evidence against her and never would be because she was innocent. It is noted that the judicial system in Spain is often criticized for being inadequate and often bending the law. Prosecutors and police in Spain focus on prioritizing their theories over justice, showing a complete disregard for the legal process. The police report highlighted circumstantial evidence linking Dolores to the crime and included a psychological profile of her, as there was no physical evidence. Ultimately, the jury found Dolores Vasquez guilty of murder, resulting in a 16-year prison sentence. The verdict was met with public celebration. Rocio's funeral drew a large crowd. During this time, the Rocio family and the local community felt a growing sense of fear. This atmosphere of fear was amplified by the numerous television programs that covered the case. After Dolores's arrest, the Rocio family appeared on various programs, sharing past stories that described Dolores as cold, unfriendly, demanding, and cruel. It took years and another similar crime to reveal that Rocio Waninkoff was not killed by Dolores Vasquez. On the morning of August 15, 2003, the parents of 17-year-old Sonia Carabantes reported her missing to the police. Sonia's friends said they had dropped Sonia off at her home, but she was not there. A short distance from her home, near a tree, her parents discovered her shoes, purse, and cell phone, along with traces of blood on nearby cars. The police quickly began searching for and investigating Sonia's case. As time went on, the family's despair deepened. They searched the neighborhood, but the bloodstains on Sonia's clothes left little hope that she would be returned safely. A key piece of evidence in Sonia's case was the car's headlights. The police contacted all local auto repair shops to find a car with a broken headlight matching the description. At the same time, the police found many similarities between Rocio's and Sonia's cases. Both girls had disappeared during the fair. All employees working at the fairs in Coin and Matril were investigated, as was the case with Rocio. Flyers with Sonia's picture were widely distributed, and many people actively participated in the search for her. They not only volunteered their time, but also provided any assistance needed to help the police. Police continued their investigation. However, on the 5th day after Sonia went missing, search dogs led them to Sonia's body, which was hidden in a creek under a pile of rocks. Heavy rains the night before had washed away any evidence that could help identify her attacker. On the day of her disappearance, Sonia had been at a fair in Coin. She had said goodbye to her friends near her home, where she was then attacked. Her attacker struck her multiple times, leaving her unconscious and defenseless due to the sudden and violent nature of the attack. The attacker then abducted her by car to a remote area away from her home. Sonia suffered both internal and external injuries before being strangled, ultimately resulting in her death. Sonia was found quickly, allowing police to gather and analyze crucial evidence from her body. Colonel Paca Gabella announced that significant evidence was discovered, including biological material. This was analyzed and added to the police forensic DNA database, leading to matches with genetic material found on a cigarette butt from the Rocio Waninkoff case. When comparing the two DNA samples, they were identical. This revealed that the man who killed Rocio in 1999 was the same individual who attacked Sonia. This suggests that Dolores Vasquez, who was wrongly convicted, while the real killer is still at large, took the life of another young girl. The evidence is clear: an English cigarette butt from Rocio's case and the skin particles found under Sonia's fingernails, all linked to the same offender. On September 18, Cecilia Pantoja, a young woman, contacted the police with suspicions about her ex-husband after seeing blood on his t-shirt just days after Sonia's body was found. Cecilia also mentioned that her ex-husband was away from home twice, driving somewhere on the day of the attack on Rocio. With the help of DNA testing and Cecilia's testimony, the police were able to identify the real killer of both Rocio and Sonia as Tony Alexander King. Tony's criminal activities began as a teenager in the Holloway area of North London. In 1985, the area was hit by a series of violent attacks on women, where victims were strangled and assaulted. At the time, Tony went by his birth name, Anthony Bramwit, then 19, was convicted of strangling 5 women until they were unconscious, using a rope or cable, and then assaulting them. The judge sentenced Tony to 10 years in prison, calling him a monster for his actions. Tony served only half of his sentence and was released in 1991, but he returned to prison shortly afterwards for robbing a woman and threatening her with a knife. He changed his name to Tony Alexander King in search of a new life, married Cecilia Pantoja, and tried to have a normal family life. They had a daughter together, but Tony soon returned to his old ways. A month after Sonia's death, he was arrested. During questioning, Tony admitted to killing 2 innocent girls. After his arrest, he recounted that he followed Rocio as she walked home from her boyfriend's house and threatened her with a knife when she tried to escape. Rocio was attacked with a knife in the neck, and Tony then stabbed her 9 times. In 2005, Tony Alexander King was sentenced to 36 years in prison for kidnapping, assault, and murder of Sonia. The court also ordered Tony to pay her family about $350,000. Tony was also sentenced to 7 years in prison for intentionally causing violence against a woman in Malaga in 2001. The following year, Tony was convicted of Rocio's murder and received an additional 19-year sentence. Before the trial, Tony wrote to Sonia and Rocio's mother, begging for their forgiveness. He is currently serving his sentence at Herrera de la Mana Maximum Security Prison in Ciudad Real, Spain. After the case was over, a huge scandal broke out in Spain because the innocent Dolores Vázquez was wrongly convicted of the murder of Rocio Waninkoff. It is hard to accept that not only can the police and the courts unfairly punish innocent people, but society can also judge and degrade them harshly. Even when a person can prove their innocence, they are still not recognized. It took more than a year to confirm that Dolores Vázquez was telling the truth and that she was completely innocent. In 2008, the Spanish Ministry of Justice offered Dolores Vázquez 120,000 euros in compensation, significantly less than the 4 million euros she had originally requested. Despite her wrongful conviction, Dolores never received an apology from the police. After being released from prison, Dolores returned to the UK. Now, more than 20 years later, Dolores has yet to receive an apology for her conviction, nor has she received any compensation since her case was closed in 2014. She works for a transport company in East London and has undergone a psychological assessment following her traumatic experience. She recently said she is still waiting for an apology after suffering from anxiety for years, which has made it difficult for her to communicate with others. The case of Dolores Vázquez, who was wrongfully imprisoned, is considered one of the most serious miscarriages of justice in Spain since 1910. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Carrie Ann Jopek. Carrie Ann Jopek was born on August 17, 1968, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, a large city with a population of over 500,000. Her parents, Carolyn and Robert, divorced when she was very young. Shortly after, her mother remarried a man named Frederick Toussaint. The family lived in downtown Milwaukee along with 2 daughters, the youngest of whom was named Maggie. Carrie grew up in a loving family and had a close relationship with Frederick, whom she considered her biological father. She did not know of her biological father's existence, as he did not communicate with her. Carrie was well educated and had everything she needed. She was friendly and kind, which helped her make many friends, including older teenagers. However, during her teenage years, Carrie's personality began to change, leading to conflicts with her mother and stepfather. When she discovered that Frederick was not her biological father, she became very angry with her parents. She often used this information against him in arguments. Some relatives described Carrie as stubborn, while others thought she was simply going through a challenging period in her life, especially since she was only 13 years old at the time. On March 15, 1982, Carrie was allowed by her parents to stay overnight at her friend Marcia's house. Since both girls were in 7th grade, they went to school together the next morning, March 16. However, because they were in different classes, they could only see each other at lunchtime. Carrie was upset because her teacher had reprimanded her for arguing with another student who had spilled paint on her. The teacher then contacted Carrie's parents to report Carrie's behavior and truancy. The teachers suggested that Carrie's mother pick her up after school to discuss her actions. However, Carrie's house was close enough to the school, so her mother allowed Carrie to walk home by herself. Carrie was upset. She knew her mother and stepfather would probably scold her, so she didn't want to go home. Her friend comforted her, and they parted ways after school. Although reluctant, Carrie had to go home because she lived only a few blocks from school. Normally, it would only take her 3 minutes to walk home, but that day, she never returned. It is important to note that the 1980s in America were generally a safe time. People trusted each other, and crime rates were low compared to today. Additionally, the incident occurred in a crowded area where everyone knew each other, so no one thought it was strange for a 13-year-old girl to walk home from school alone. Carrie did not come home. Carolyn waited for her at home and then went out to look for her. Carolyn thought that Carrie had stopped to visit a friend on the way home and would be back soon. It is important to note that they could not contact Carrie because cell phones had not yet been invented. As the night wore on, Carolyn grew increasingly concerned. She set out again to look for her daughter. First, she went to see Carrie's best friend, Robin, who lived across the street. Unfortunately, no one in Robin's house had seen or heard from Carrie since school ended. Next, Carolyn contacted Marsh, who had spent the night with Carrie. However, Marsh did not see Carrie after she left. Eager to help, Carrie's friends joined the search and began checking with neighbors and classmates who might have seen her after school, but no one had any information. By 11 p.m., a search party of local volunteers who knew the family was formed. Many neighbors, friends, and acquaintances took to the streets to patrol the area and ask questions. Unfortunately, they could not find any information about the Carrie. They decided to wait for Carrie until the next morning. On March 17, when the girl still had not returned home, Carolyn went to the police station to report her missing. By then, the Carrie had been missing for almost a day, prompting police to act quickly, as the situation could be serious. Initially, the primary theory was that Carrie had run away, as she was known to be a difficult teenager who sometimes skipped classes and often spent the night at friends' houses. Police thought that Carrie was simply spending time with friends. However, after interviewing all her friends, they realized this was not the case. None of them had seen Carrie after school, leading them to conclude that something must have happened to her on her way home. They then began questioning residents living along her route that day, but these inquiries yielded no useful information. None of the residents had seen Carrie or noticed anything unusual. The police discovered that Carrie had been upset with her family after learning that her stepfather was not her biological father. Police believed this revelation might have driven her to search for her biological father, whom she could have gone to see that day. By this time, a day had passed since Carrie left school, and there was still no news about her. The police located her biological father, Robert, who lived in a different area of Malak, hoping she might be with him. Unfortunately, when they contacted him, their hopes were dashed. Robert explained that he had been at work all day the previous day and had not seen Carrie. A thorough inspection was carried out at the house of the Carrie. Police searched through all her belongings for clues, but found nothing significant. Consequently, the search for the missing person continued. A day after her disappearance, there was still hope that the teenager was alive. However, the critical window for finding a missing person is 48 hours, after which the chances of a successful rescue decrease significantly. Therefore, the police needed to act quickly. During the investigation, the police focused on Johns, who lived just a few houses away from Carrie's family. John was 17 at the time and had developed a close relationship with Carrie. The police learned that he had a rebellious personality and a history of legal trouble, including convictions for petty theft and selling marijuana. Despite their 4-year age difference, John showed an interest in Carrie, which raised concerns. The police decided to investigate further and brought John in for questioning. John adamantly denied any involvement in Carrie's disappearance, claiming that he had not even seen her that day. The police were unable to gather any useful information during their questioning, and there was no solid evidence against John. As a result, he was released. The police then turned their attention to her stepfather, Frederick. In these cases, the perpetrator was often someone close to the victim, and cases involving stepfathers were not uncommon, which added to their interest in him. The police looked closely at her family, especially the relationship between Carrie and Frederick. They discovered that the two had recently been fighting, a change from their previous relationship. Frederick attributed the turmoil to Carrie's adolescence, believing that her hormones had made her more irritable and prone to anger over small matters. Despite this, he maintains that he would never harm her. An anonymous witness reported some details regarding her stepfather, Frederick. They mentioned that the day after Carrie went missing, Frederick poured a new concrete slab in the backyard. The witness suggested that this may have been Frederick's way of disposing of the body by burying it underneath the concrete slab. This information seems suspicious and should be investigated. The concrete slab was examined using ground-penetrating radar, and no suspicious voids were detected. When the area beneath the slab was excavated, it was found to be empty. The yard was well maintained, showing no signs of recent digging. The police decided to conduct a second round of questioning with the Carrie's friends, focusing on the possibility that she might have run away with a boyfriend. Although Carrie never mentioned having a boyfriend to her parents, the police speculated that she may have kept this relationship secret. However, her friends firmly denied this possibility, insisting that Carrie was not in a relationship with anyone. The police tried to collect evidence, but it is important to note that forensic science in the 1980s was not as advanced as it is today. At that time, there was no DNA testing, trackable cell phones, cameras, or GPS technology. This made finding evidence more difficult. As a result, the police could not find any clues. Carrie seemed to have disappeared without a trace. Lack of evidence then caused the case to stall. The police did not have a strong motive for Carrie's abduction, nor could they find a suspect. To raise public awareness of their daughter's disappearance, Carrie's parents turned to the media for help. They appealed to anyone with information about Carrie to come forward, but still, no leads came. The investigation was stalled due to lack of evidence. More than a year later, on September 2, 1983, a mysterious body was found in the John family home. The contractor was repairing the back porch. He leveled the ground and dug up a significant amount of dirt. While doing so, he noticed a foul odor coming from a pile of disturbed dirt. Upon inspection, he discovered human remains. The contractor immediately called the police. Everyone believed the remains to be those of Carrie. The body was then subjected to dental records analysis to determine the identity of the remains. All members of John's family were questioned. During his police interview, John denied any involvement and requested a lawyer. A year earlier, the police had lacked substantial evidence to charge or detain him, so they released him but continued to view him as a suspect. The remaining members of John's family have denied any involvement in the murder. The medical examiner investigated Carrie's cause of death and discovered severe injuries to her head and neck. She had significant internal bleeding with lacerations on her left side. These injuries suggested that she had been attacked by someone else, leading to the case being classified as a homicide. Unfortunately, the autopsy was unable to provide enough information to determine whether rape had occurred. Carrie's body was found in her friend John's backyard, but this does not mean that he was responsible for her death or that he buried her there. Witnesses said that on the day she disappeared, there was a party at John's house. Police had to piece together the case from scratch, with few clues to follow. And so much time had passed since the party that it was difficult for those who were there to remember what happened. Several teenagers were interviewed about the party at John's house. Some claimed they were there but could not remember any details. Others said they had only heard about the party and were not actually there. John claimed he did not organize any events that day, and police found no evidence to contradict his statement. 4 days after Carrie's body was discovered, police received a new lead. A witness identified Jose Ferreira, a 16-year-old boy who lived next door to Carrie. He was seen in John's backyard when Carrie's body was discovered, which raised some suspicion. The police decided to pursue the lead and invited Jose to the police station for questioning. Jose denied any involvement in Carrie's death or disappearance. Jose knew her well and was friends with her, so he was very upset when he discovered her body in the backyard. He claimed that he did it to honor his old friend. Jose's story seemed credible. He was also questioned about a party at John's house on the day Carrie went missing, but he said it never happened. The police had no evidence against Jose, so they had to release him after questioning. Friends described Jose as friendly and cheerful, and no one believed he would hurt Carrie. They spent a lot of time together and were close friends. The investigation continued, but no leads were found. The case hit a dead end. It wasn't until 33 years after Carrie's murder that the investigation made any progress. On October 11, 2015, a man contacted a journalist to confess to the murder. His name was Jose Ferreira. In addition to contacting the journalist, he called the hotline and admitted to killing 13-year-old Carrie Ann Jopek years earlier. He also confessed to his wife about the crime. Journalists and switchboard operators were stunned by his confession and immediately notified the police. At the same time, Jose's wife learned of his crimes and went to the nearest police station to report him. Jose was 50 years old at the time. The police reviewed the case file. Despite Jose's confession, the police were in no hurry to arrest him. 2 days after his telephone confession, Jose turned himself into the police station and gave a detailed account of the events of 33 years ago. His sudden actions and confession were because he believed it would prevent his wife from getting a divorce. This statement puzzled the police. Jose said that on the day of the incident, Carrie returned home from school. She noticed a party going on at John's house. She wanted to avoid going home where she would face punishment, so she decided to join the party. At the party, she met Jose and they engaged in conversation. Then they went down to the basement together to find some wine. On the way down to the basement, he kissed her and she agreed. As they walked down the stairs to the basement, Carrie suddenly changed her mind and said she wanted to leave. In a fit of rage, he pushed her, causing her to lose her balance and fall down the stairs, resulting in a broken neck. In a moment of loss of control, he raped her, not knowing that she had died from the fall. His actions were classified as sexual assault and use of force. He defended himself by claiming that he had loved Carrie. He felt offended by her decision to leave, but he insisted that he did not want her to die. He panicked and dismissed the incident as an accident. Jose feared going to jail and ruining his life. He seized the opportunity during a lively party when no one noticed his presence in the basement. He needed to dispose of the body quickly to avoid being seen. Jose hid the body, and when night fell, he took a shovel and dragged Carrie into the backyard. In the dark, he quietly dug a hole and buried her. He believed that his plan had gone smoothly and that no one had seen him. However, the police were baffled by his story. They found it hard to believe that at such a crowded party, no one had noticed them together, and no one had noticed him digging the hole and burying Carrie. The police suspected that Jose might have had an accomplice, but he adamantly denied that anyone else was involved. Carrie's family said that Jose often visited them and was present at the farewell and burial. Carrie's mother remembered that Jose had mentioned being haunted by Carrie's ghost, which surprised them, but they ignored it at the time. While this could have been a warning sign, no one thought that the killer could be one of the friendly people in the neighborhood. Jose later revealed that Carrie's spirit had haunted him for years, making it impossible for him to live a normal life. This ultimately contributed to his decision to confess to the crime to ease his conscience. During the trial, the prosecutor asked for Jose to be convicted of second-degree murder. The defense argued that the case was manslaughter. Initially, bail was set at $200,000, but Jose then began to recant his confession. The prosecution's case relied heavily on Jose's confession. It would have been difficult to convince the jury of his guilt without any evidence. Ultimately, the prosecution offered a plea deal. In March 2017, Jose Ferreira agreed to plead guilty to sexually assaulting Carrie, which reduced his prison sentence to 7 years. The final sentence was handed down 35 years after Carrie was murdered. In 2022, Jose was released from prison and moved to the nearby town of Glendale, Wisconsin. He was listed in a police database as a potential sex offender and placed on supervision. Carrie's family expressed outrage that the man who murdered and raped a 13-year-old girl was released after only 7 years. He now lives a quiet life, as if nothing had happened, and as if he had not taken an innocent life. Welcome back to our channel. Today we will explore a new case, the case of Stay Family. Family massacre cases always leave the public shocked and heartbroken, not only because of their brutality, but also due to the surprising nature of the tragedy occurring in places that seem the safest. Among the most shocking cases in the history of American justice is the Stay Family case, a tragedy that claimed 6 innocent lives and exposed the dark side of domestic violence and human psychology. Through this heartbreaking story, the courage and resilience of Cassidy Stay, the sole survivor, shine as a glimmer of hope amid the darkness of tragedy. A teenage girl answered the door when someone knocked. She found a delivery man waiting outside and informed him that her parents were not home, asking him to return later. Later, the courier came back, but this time, the situation took a turn for the worse. The Stay family lived in that house. The father, 39-year-old Stephen Stay, and his wife, 33-year-old Katie Stay. They had 5 children: 15-year-old Cassidy, 13-year-old Brian, 9-year-old Emily, 7-year-old Rebecca, and 4-year-old Zach. They were a close-knit and happy family, well known among their neighbors for their Christmas parties and Halloween celebrations. The Stay family lived in a comfortable and safe neighborhood in Houston, Texas. Stephen had been working in real estate for many years and had just started his own small agency. Katie was a dedicated housewife who focused on taking care of their children and managing household tasks, always supporting her husband. On July 9, 2014, they visited their grandmother in the morning. Later that afternoon, after returning home, Katie and Stephen went to the bank, leaving their daughter Cassidy in charge of her younger siblings. A knock sounded at the door. Cassidy opened it and saw a courier from a delivery service holding a package. She informed him that her parents were not home. Cassidy didn't see the courier's face clearly, so she asked him to come back later and shut the door. After a while, the courier returned. When she opened the door again, she repeated that her parents were not home yet. This time, she looked closely at his face and recognized him. It was Ronald Lee Haskell, her Aunt Melanie Lyons' ex-husband, who was 33 years old. When Ronald saw that Cassidy recognized him, he told her he wanted to see Melanie. Cassidy replied that Melanie was not home. Worried, she tried to quickly close the door, but this made Ronald angry. He kicked the door hard, causing Cassidy to fall to the floor. He forced his way into the house and pulled out a gun. Instead of a package, he had a folded blanket, which he planned to use as a silencer. The children were terrified, clinging to each other and pleading with Ronald to leave, but he ignored their pleas. He held them hostage while waiting for Stephen and Katie to come back. When Katie returned from the bank and entered the house, Ronald confronted them with a weapon, demanding to know where Melanie was. They refused to answer because they knew he was dangerous. That was why Melanie had divorced him, and she was hiding. Ronald took their mobile phones and ordered them to lie face down on the floor. Realizing the danger, Katie jumped up and screamed, "No!" But then, he attacked her in the face and proceeded to target each family member on the floor, aiming for the back of their heads, including the children. Zach also was shot in the shoulder. The boy got up and ran to his father, who had already been shot. Ronald approached and callously attacked Zach in the head. When it was Cassidy's turn, the bullet unexpectedly ricocheted off her head without Ronald noticing. Seeing what had happened, she lay still and silent. Ronald, believing everyone was dead, decided to leave. He grabbed the keys to the Honda parked nearby and drove away with the Stay family's car. Once he was gone, Cassidy called 911. She informed them that Ronald had shot her entire family and that everyone was dead except for her and her brother, who she could hear struggling to breathe. The police and ambulance arrived at the scene to find a horrific sight inside the house. 6 individuals were lying on the floor, hands behind their heads, in a large pool of blood. At this time, all 6 were deceased. Cassidy was the only survivor. She suffered a minor head injury, received treatment, and fully recovered. She then moved in with her maternal grandparents and was able to share the details of the brutal murder. Cassidy informed the police that Ronald had been stalking her aunt, Melanie, and harassing the entire her family. She believed that Ronald had gone to her grandparents' house, where her aunt Melanie lived. Meanwhile, the police discovered that Ronald had fled the crime scene in the Stay family's Honda, which was now considered a wanted vehicle. It was urgent to locate this dangerous criminal before he could hurt anyone else. As the police headed to Melanie's house, they spotted the Honda. Ronald's driveway was blocked, and he stopped the car, but he refused to exit. Instead, he threatened to self-harm. Surrounding him were 50 police officers, all armed, demanding that he get out of the vehicle. In response, Ronald claimed to be struggling with mental health issues and insisted on speaking with his brother, who lived in California, stating that he did not want to go to prison. Negotiations lasted 3 hours until Ronald finally exited the car. He was arrested and charged with multiple counts of murder. As a result of the murders of the Stay family, the death penalty was being considered for Ronald, who remained in jail without bail after being released from the hospital. Cassidy, along with her grandfather and uncle, attended a family memorial event where 600 colorful balloons were released. She quoted her favorite Harry Potter book saying, "Happiness can be found even in the darkest times if only you remember to turn on the light." Cassidy expressed her belief that her parents, Brian, Emily, Rebecca, and Zach, were in a better place and that she would see them again one day. She also mentioned that she is staying strong during this challenging time. The police started investigating Ronald's background and found multiple charges of domestic violence made by his ex-wife, Melanie. He and Melanie were married in California in 2002 after having known each other since elementary school. They moved from their hometown to Utah, where Ronald deliberately cut Melanie off from her family. Problems arose almost immediately after their wedding, as he manipulated her into feeling unwanted by everyone, including her relatives. Throughout their marriage, Ronald subjected Melanie to physical, sexual, and emotional abuse. They had 4 children together, and he even assaulted Melanie during her pregnancies, eventually directing his violence towards the children as well. Ronald had a low income as a courier, which made it difficult to support their large family. Despite their financial struggles, he did not allow Melanie to work or leave the house, isolating her from anyone who could help. In 2008, Melanie seized a chance to contact the police when Ronald accidentally left his phone unattended after physically assaulting her. She was taken to the hospital, and Ronald received an 8-month suspended sentence. Unfortunately, this punishment did not stop him. The abuse started again as soon as she returned home. Ronald grew even more aggressive and threatened to kill her family if she reported him again, causing her to live in constant fear. By 2013, Melanie could no longer tolerate her situation. She and her children left their home while Ronald was at work and sought safety in a shelter. She filed for divorce and obtained a restraining order against Ronald. In need of support, she reached out to her sister, Katie. Despite not being very close, Katie felt compelled to help her sister and took Melanie and her 4 children to their parents' house in Houston, Texas, where they would be safe. Melanie's divorce from Ronald was finalized on February 14, 2014. They were granted joint custody of the children, with Melanie receiving primary custody. Ronald was ordered to pay $700 a month in alimony from his modest income. After the divorce, Ronald moved in with his parents in California. He was ordered to stay away from Melanie, her family, and the children's school. To evaluate his emotional stability and communication skills with the children, he was required to undergo a psychological examination, but he never succeeded. While living with his parents, Ronald began to take out his frustrations on them, physically abusing his elderly parents and older sister. In a disturbing incident, when he learned that his mother had been in contact with Melanie, he attacked her, bound her to a chair, and choked her until she lost consciousness. His sister eventually discovered their mother and called the police, but Ronald managed to avoid serious repercussions and continued the abuse towards his family. Ronald's family found it hard to understand why he had become so cruel, especially given that he was raised in a loving environment. In school, he was a popular football player, crowned prom king, and had many female friends. No one could believe that the friendly and cheerful Ronald would turn into a violent person. And in a moment of anger, Ronald sought revenge on his ex-wife. Tragically, he ended up killing his Stays family instead. The police was discovered that Ronald did not own any registered firearms. He had stolen a pistol from his ex-girlfriend and bought over 200 rounds of ammunition from a weapons store. A ballistic test confirmed that the pistol found with him matched the bullets found at the murder scene. Additionally, notes outlining his murder plans were discovered in his notebook, showing that he originally intended to kill Melanie, her parents, and her sister as part of his revenge. It is clear that Ronald had planned this horrific act and intended to kill many people. If Cassidy had not quickly called 911 and the police had not intervened, Ronald would have killed Melanie, her parents, and possibly others. A memorial was set up in front of the deceased family's home, where neighbors and community members brought flowers to honor their memory. Melanie did feel guilty for her ex-husband's actions and found it difficult to understand why he chose to kill Katie and Katie's family instead of her. At this time, the court was significantly affected by damage caused by a storm, resulting in a delay in the trial. It wasn't until August 25, 2019, that the trial finally started, with Ronald facing the death penalty. Ronald fainted during the proceedings and had to be placed in a wheelchair. His lawyer claimed that he was scared and required a mental health assessment. A psychiatric evaluation revealed changes in his behavior, and he was diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder. The psychiatrist believed he was pretending to have a mental illness to evade responsibility for his actions. Ronald had previously been diagnosed with depression and bipolar disorder while living with his parents and had attempted suicide 3 times without success. Ronald confessed to killing Stay's family, but said that voices in his head urged him to do it. He claimed he wasn't aware of his actions at the time. However, the prosecution presented CCTV footage showing Ronald at a hotel, a store, and a cinema before the murder. In the footage, he appeared calm and rational, which suggested he was not insane. The defendant's brother stated that Ronald was extremely angry with Katie, who aided Melanie and the children in their escape. He wanted to take revenge on her. Melanie corroborated this by saying he had been stalking her and had threatened to kill the entire her family. Notes found in his notebook indicated that he had been planning these actions for several months, showing that this was not a result of sudden insanity. In court, Cassidy also was the key witness against Ronald. She had grown up significantly and was a student at the University of Brick-Mayanka in Utah, where she was also engaged to her boyfriend. Cassidy recounted the terrifying experiences she had in the house during the murder and was shocked that Ronald showed no remorse for his actions. Throughout the 5 years he spent in prison awaiting trial, he did not reflect on his crime or feel any regret. Ronald was found guilty and sentenced to death by lethal injection. He is currently on death row waiting for his execution. The Stay family massacre is not only a tragic loss, but also a profound reminder of the impact of domestic violence and the dangers of leaving mental health issues untreated. Although the pain Cassidy Stay endured is immeasurable, she chose to use her loss as motivation to spread a message of courage and mental strength. The Stay family's story not only reminds us of the importance of protecting our loved ones, but it also inspires each person to feel a sense of responsibility to the community in preventing and resolving violence. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Rosalia Jara. Rosalia Daniela Jara was born on September 12, 1997 in Fort Ole, a small town in the Vera department of Santa Fe, Argentina. She grew up in a close-knit family with limited means. Her mother, Liliana Jara, was the head of the family. Rosalia spent her childhood and adolescence in Fortin, where she attended primary school in a neighborhood called San Jose Obre. She aspired to become either a teacher or a police officer. She is known to be kind and thoughtful, especially to her family. When she was in 6th grade, she met Juan Oscar Valdez, a teacher, and they quickly secretly dated each other. At the time, she was only 13 years old, while Juan was 32 and married. Rosalia only shared this relationship with her sister, and her mother only found out when she became pregnant. After Rosalia gave birth to a daughter named Alma, Juan distanced himself and refused to acknowledge Alma's as his child. About a year later, Rosalia began living with a man named Aldo. There was a large age difference between them. This relationship did not go very well, and after another conflict, they decided to break up. On Saturday, July 1, 2017, Rosalia visited her mother Liliana, asking her to take care of her 2-year-old daughter, Alma. After that, Rosalia left home, taking very few belongings. Liliana assumed that Rosalia would be back soon, but that was not the case. That evening, Rosalia wears a red sports jacket, blue jeans, and new pink sneakers. Rumor has it that she went out to play cards with the US $20 she borrowed. She claimed she needed to make some money and wanted to try her luck. Around 9:00 p.m., Liliana called Rosalia, who said she was at a bar, enjoying the evening with friends while playing 5-card stud poker. She didn't mention anything concerning during their conversation, and this was the last time they spoke. Around 10:00 p.m., Rosalia was seen leaving a bar while talking on her cell phone and heading towards a checkpoint. After midnight, her mother, Liliana, tried repeatedly to reach her, but received no response. The following day, her mother went to the city police station to report her daughter, Rosalia, missing. Liliana found it unusual that she had not returned home, as Liliana knew how much her daughter valued family. However, the police were not interested in what Liliana said and refused to conduct a search. They argued that Rosalia, 19 years old, may have voluntarily left home. Days passed, and local authorities took no action to find Rosalia. A week after she went missing, local feminist groups organized a protest to pressure law enforcement. On the 11th day since she disappearance, authorities finally began search operations in Fort Ole and nearby areas. They conducted a careful search of the area and eventually discovered several items believed to belong to Rosalia. However, these findings did not help them find her. It is worth noting that after Rosalia went missing, most of the authorities' attention was focused on Juan. The police discovered that he left his home around 9 p.m. on July 1, driving a white Toyota Corolla, which partially matched the route Rosalia was believed to have taken. He returned home after 1 a.m. Witnesses near the bar reported seeing a similar white car with tinted windows around that time. Apparently, Juan was aware that the police suspected him of being involved in Rosalia's disappearance, which explains why he damaged his phone right before the authorities confiscated his phone. Rosalia's call history and phone location analysis revealed some important information, data related to Juan. On the night of her disappearance, there were about 20 calls between their two mobile numbers, most of which were initiated by Juan. Additionally, geolocation data from antenna signals indicated that Rosalia's and Juan's phones were close to each other at one point. Additionally, GPS data also showed that Juan's car was in the area during that time. Based on evidence and testimony from several witnesses, Juan was arrested in late July 2017. In early August 2017, the police organized a series of operations to clarify the chronology of incident related to Rosalia's disappearance. A representative of the Ministry of Security confirmed that during these operations, several searches took place simultaneously. One search took place at the local health department, while two others were organized at the homes of several police officers who were later suspected. The main goal of the search at the medical center was to find evidence suggesting that Rosalia may have had an abortion shortly before she went missing. However, this hypothesis was dismissed. Meanwhile, the search for Rosalia, the missing girl, continued. The main suspect, Juan, refused to testify about his relationship with her and about the many calls he made on the day she was last seen. In April 2018, during a hearing in the city of Vera, the judge rejected a request from Juan's lawyer to allow him to remain free. The judge decided that he should remain in custody indefinitely, as there was still a risk that he could influence witnesses. However, Juan's lawyer stated that the prosecution lacked evidence to link he to the crime. The lawyer emphasized that he had been cooperating with authorities from the start. The lawyer also dismissed the prosecution's claim that Juan intentionally damaged his phone to destroy evidence. On August 26, 2018, two hunters discovered human remains near a stream in the city of Londrina. The remains included a skull and several bone fragments. Alongside these, a pink sports jacket, sneakers, and other personal items believed to belong to the victim were found. Rosalia's family identified most of these items. The remains were sent to the Institute of Forensic Medicine for anthropological analysis. Police then went to the home of Aldo, Rosalia's ex-boyfriend, where she had lived prior to her disappearance. With Aldo's permission, they searched the house for a lock that matched a key found in the sports jacket's pocket. However, Aldo explained that he had to break the front door locks because he had not lived there for a long time and didn't know where his keys were. On September 8, 2018, investigative police officers conducted several procedures related to this case. The first procedure took place at the Municipal Health Service Department, where blood samples were taken from Liliana and her granddaughter Alma. The aim is to determine whether their DNA matches that of the remains that have been found. The Argentine Institute of Forensic Medicine confirmed that the remains found belonged to Rosalia, with a nearly 100% probability. Although forensic experts were unable to determine the cause of her death, it was clear that she had been murdered by violence, as evidenced by severe injuries to her left cheekbone, which had destroyed her skull. For Gustavo Monzon, the prosecutor in charge of the case, the evidence collected became a crucial step in the investigation. After completing all procedures, Rosalia's remains were returned to her family for burial. After it was confirmed that she had died from physical abuse, the State Attorney General's office decided to change the crime classification to homicide. More than a year and a half after her disappearance, the case finally moved to the public trial stage. In 2018, Juan Valdez was charged with Rosalia's murder. His lawyer has objected to this, arguing that the actual reasons for Rosalia's death were not determined. After hearing this, the court ordered the exhumation of her remains for further examination. Several months later, the original judge was dismissed due to allegations of bias against Juan. On July 2, 2019, the new judge began reviewing the case and denied Juan's attorney's request to revoke the pretrial detention order. Local media have been regularly reporting on key points in the investigation. In particular, Attorney General Gustavo Monzon has suggested that Juan killed Rosalía simply because she asked for child support for Alma, whom Juan acknowledged as his child. Gustavo claimed that just a day before Rosalía's disappearance, she had called Juan to voice her frustrations about his refusal to help with child support. Returning to the trial, it is important to clarify the prosecution's main hypothesis. On Saturday, July 1, 2017, while Juan's wife was away, he contacted Rosalía to discuss their meeting. As previously mentioned, he and she had multiple phone calls that day, with the last call initiated by Juan. This call lasted no more than 30 seconds, but it was enough for he to specify the exact time and place for their meeting. It is believed that when he met she, he used force to make her get into his car and turned off her mobile phone. From that moment on, her phone no longer had a signal. According to the timeline created by the prosecutors, Juan drove towards the municipality of Landry. At some point during the drive, he allegedly struck Rosalía on the head, leading to her death. He then drove a few more kilometers to a stream to dispose of her body. During the hearing, the prosecutor presented all the evidence related to the case. In addition to the report from the experts of the Institute of Forensic Medicine, the prosecution had witness testimony, autopsy reports, DNA analysis results, and forensic reports. The case documents include information from telephone company, such as call records, text messages, and geolocation information. This information fully corroborates the main version of the prosecution. Additionally, the prosecutor's team had testimony from Juan's 20-year-old stepdaughter, Macarena. She said that Juan left home around 9 p.m. that night, and she did not see him return. This contradicts Juan's testimony, which states that on the day of the incident, he went to bed early and did not leave the house. Another piece of indirect evidence presented by the prosecution was related to Juan's inappropriate behavior towards teenage girls. This evidence was based on the testimony of a female student. She reported that he had subjected her to indecent acts when she was just 12 years old. Additionally, there was other evidence that Juan had problems at the school, where he occasionally taught, all related to his relationships with minors. In November 2019, Rosalía's family changed their lawyer. By March 2020, their new lawyer, Caroline Walker, stated that after reviewing the case documents, she discovered that the investigation had overlooked several important elements. Curiously, Juan was not prosecuted for sexually assaulting Rosalía, even though their romantic relationship started long before she turned 18. Caroline also realized that as she gathered evidence against Juan, he was clearly a dangerous predator. For this reason, she did not rule out the possibility of future cases related to these crimes. The main trial took place at the Vera Municipal Court on Tuesday, July 7, 2020. This was 3 years after the disappearance and 2 years after the discovery of Rosalía's remains. Only the main representatives of the parties attended the trial. Other members, journalists, and many experts were in other rooms of the court. Given the case's significance and the announced restrictions, various feminist groups supporting Rosalía's family requested authorities to broadcast the trial daily. In his opening speech, Prosecutor Gustavo stated that he would seek a life sentence for Juan. There were several reasons for this decision, the most important of which was that Rosalía had been in an unequal relationship with him. Juan not only controlled her, but also dominated her in social relationships. Furthermore, he has consistently failed to acknowledge their common child, Alma. Therefore, the punishment Gustavo proposed, that is, life imprisonment, was entirely appropriate to the extent of the damage Juan had caused to all members of Rosalía's family. Caroline Walker, the lawyer representing Rosalía's family, criticized the authorities for their initial response, when Rosalia was reported missing. She noted that the authorities were initially not proactive in searching for Rosalia and did not take the case seriously. Additionally, she stressed that Rosalia's remains were not discovered by law enforcement officers, but were found by two hunters. She also said that in her opinion, a police officer informed Juan about the investigation. This led to some important information being leaked, which could have helped him disappear just before his arrest. The trial lasted about a month and featured around 100 expert testimonies. Details of the phone calls between Rosalia and Juan on the day of her disappearance were also presented. It was revealed that he made the last call shortly after she left the bar, and her phone was turned off soon after. Several witnesses reported seeing a similar white car near the bar that evening. Juan was also seen leaving the house around 9:00 p.m., and a while later he came back. Prosecutors argued that this brief time frame was sufficient for him to commit the crime and dispose of the evidence. Additionally, another important piece of evidence was geolocation data from the phones, which showed that Juan and Rosalia's phones were in close proximity for a period of time. The prosecution delivered a strong closing argument, presenting both direct and indirect evidence that confirmed Juan Valdez's guilt in the crime. They firmly believed that Rosalia's life was ended due to a violent act by he, although the exact cause of death was not determined. But forensic experts believed that she could have died from a severe blow to the left cheekbone. Juan also had the opportunity to defend himself. He attempted to dispute all the evidence presented by the authorities, particularly denying allegations that he intentionally damaged his mobile phone. Furthermore, Juan argued that the authorities had made a serious mistake by focusing on him, which had led to a failure to identify who had actually harmed Rosalia. On August 3, 2020, the much-awaited verdict was announced. The court found Juan Oscar Valdez guilty on all charges. He listened to his sentence with his eyes downcast. Outside the courtroom, many young people from various human rights organizations had gathered to show support for Rosalia's family and to follow the trial's progress. Shortly after the guilty verdict, Juan's lawyer filed an appeal against the trial court's decision. During the appeal, Juan's lawyer argued that the prosecution had not presented clear evidence to prove that Rosalia had actually gotten into Juan's car on the day she disappeared. Additionally, the lawyer also argued that Aldo, her last boyfriend, whom she had accused of sexual assault, was the one people should suspect. The defense also stressed that the fact that Juan had a daughter with Rosalia did not prove that he had a motive to commit a serious crime. The prosecution aimed to counter the arguments made by Juan's lawyer. They said that from the beginning of the investigation, they considered many theories, but all were discarded when the evidence pointed to Juan as the perpetrator. Caroline Walker, the lawyer representing Rosalia's family, agreed with the prosecution's position. On October 7, 2021, the Vera Court of Appeals issued a unanimous 3-judge decision. They did not accept the appeal and request to overturn the sentence that Juan's lawyer had filed. Therefore, the previous judgment of the trial court, according to which Juan was sentenced to life in prison, remained in place. In addition, the prosecutor's office was asked to conduct an internal investigation into the misconduct of some of the police officers involved. Rosalia's case became a symbol of solidarity and feminist movements in the northern province of Santa Fe. It highlighted the issue of gender violence in local media and sparked discussions during political debates. Although Rosalia's family achieved justice, it did not erase their pain. Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Megan Emirowicz. A young girl's 18th birthday celebration turned into a nightmare. We'll find out in today's video. It took Conrad Emirowicz and Julia years to conceive. After unsuccessful attempts to conceive, they sought help at a specialist clinic, Medical professionals ran tests and determined that the couple would never be able to have biological children. The news devastated Conrad, 40, and his 31-year-old wife, Julia, who had always dreamed of a large family. However, they eventually accepted their situation. At that time, they had been married for over 2 years. In 2002, they adopted a baby girl named Megan. Just 3 days after her birth, she was taken away from her biological mother, who was struggling with addiction. Megan was placed in a more stable environment. A few months after adopting 2 children, Julia was surprised to discover that she was pregnant. They considered it a miracle and believed that the child was a blessing from God for their good deeds. Their 3rd child, Morgan, was also their only biological child. Although only one of their 3 children was biological, they loved them all equally. With 3 young children, the couple experienced the challenges of caring for newborns, including the constant need to change diapers. This made them consider starting their own business, as they realized how expensive disposable diapers could be. They created soft cloth diapers. The diapers were highly absorbent, and while Julia made them at home, Conrad worked on marketing the product. Their diapers became quite popular. Conrad worked in information technology at a local IT company. 3 years later, Julia became pregnant again and gave birth to a baby girl named Anne. It turned out that the doctors had made a mistake, and they were able to have a baby after all. During this time, the family lived in Rowland Township, Michigan, a peaceful and cozy area, away from the hustle and bustle of big cities. Conrad began drinking heavily. This put a strain on their relationship, leading to frequent arguments. Finally, in 2011, Julia decided to file for divorce. After the divorce, the couple shared joint custody for the first few years, but the children lived primarily with their mother. When the older children, Austin and Megan, became teenagers, their parents suggested that they choose which parent they wanted to live with. Their mother was quite strict, while their father was more lenient and allowed them to attend parties and invite friends over. Additionally, his new home had more space, so Austin and Megan decided to live with him, thinking they would have more freedom. At first, everything seemed great. The teenagers felt like they were enjoying their newfound freedom. Conrad struggled with his alcoholism and never overcame it. Over time, he drank more heavily and neglected household chores such as cleaning and chores. As a result, the house and yard became increasingly messy. What had once been a comfortable place became an unsuitable environment for the children. Morgan and Anne, who lived with their mother, stopped visiting their father altogether because they were embarrassed to discuss him and did not want to bring friends over. Meanwhile, the eldest son, Austin, began to argue more frequently with Conrad. Austin was frustrated with his father's behavior, but felt powerless to change it. As his resentment grew, it turned into anger, and he even resorted to physical violence when confronting Conrad. One notable incident occurred at a friend's birthday party of Austin's. Conrad arrived drunk and disheveled, which Austin found embarrassing. On another occasion, Conrad attended Austin's graduation drunk and slurring his words. That night, Austin even noticed a foul odor coming from his father. Before he turned 18, Austin began looking for a job so he could move out. He saved enough money to live with friends, which helped him escape the toxic environment at home. As a result, he almost stopped communicating with the rest of his family. Meanwhile, Megan, who chose to live with her father Conrad, was left to do most of the household chores, including laundry, cooking, cleaning, and making sure her father stayed out of trouble. This pressure may have contributed to her developing behavioral problems, which friends and family eventually noticed. Megan began to harbor resentment toward her father, especially after he threatened a teacher with a knife, which led to her being expelled from school. As a result, her father arranged for her to be homeschooled. For reasons unknown, Megan also did not seek help from her mother and had no intention of moving in with her. One day, Conrad was too drunk to take Megan on a business trip, so she took his car without permission and drove away. Unfortunately, Megan got into an accident and crashed the car, but she suffered minimal legal consequences. Meanwhile, Conrad's alcoholism worsened. The family's difficulties left Megan shouldering all the household chores. She was overwhelmed by the myriad of problems, and chaos in the house continued to escalate. One day, Julia came to help clean. However, it took her about 10 hours to clean just one room. When she went down to the basement, she was overwhelmed by the smell of cat urine. She suggested to Megan that they move in together to escape the hardships of living with Conrad, an alcoholic father. But Megan refused. She chose to continue supporting her father, and by 2020, the situation became completely dire. Trash filled the yard, and the house was a mess. During this time, Megan was Conrad's only source of support. Since 2021, he had been experiencing health issues due to long-term alcohol abuse. He would occasionally lose consciousness and have trouble controlling his bladder. Megan stayed close to her father. She felt that she couldn't leave him because she feared he wouldn't survive without her. Despite his drinking, but Conrad was never aggressive. He was actually a nice guy. They would argue, but their conflicts were usually just minor verbal disagreements. In the fall of 2021, Megan is planning to celebrate her 18th birthday. Although her birthday is September 29, she decides to have the party on October 1 after school so all her friends can attend. Conrad agreed to pay for the hotel room for the event, even though he initially objected. On the morning of the holiday, her father, Conrad, was supposed to take her to the hairdresser. However, when Megan woke up, she found him asleep on the couch in the living room. Conrad was drunk and did not respond to her attempts to wake him. Frustrated, Megan yelled that he had disappointed her, to which her father responded with a yell, then rolled over and went back to sleep. Megan became extremely angry and started throwing objects at Conrad. Then she asked a friend to take her to the hair salon. She also took a tearful photo and posted it on social media to express her frustration with the situation. The next morning, Megan took out her dad's bank card, but it wouldn't work when she tried to make a payment. She assumed she had entered the wrong PIN. She tried calling Conrad, but he didn't answer. So she asked her friend Kayla, who lived nearby, to stop by her house and ask Conrad for the PIN. Kayla arrived around 4 p.m. When she walked into the house and greeted Conrad from a distance, she was shocked to see him up close. He was alive, but his body was covered in grotesque sores. His fingers looked burned, and his legs had a greenish tint. Despite his condition, Conrad provided her with the PIN code for his card. Kayla then called Megan to inform her of the situation. Kayla was surprised that Megan heard the situation and remained calm. Megan advised her to ignore her drunken father. Kayla then called Austin, who came to help, and asked Kayla to report what she saw to the police. She called 911 and waited in the driveway for the ambulance. Kayla spent 15 minutes talking to Megan, but Megan did not seem to understand the severity of the situation. The ambulance arrived very quickly, and they took Conrad out of the house. At that moment, Austin arrived with his friend Lucas. Austin asked his father what happened, and his father assured him that everything was fine. When the two young men entered the house, they discovered blood and a white powder on the sofa where their father was lying. Nearby, there was an open bottle of chemicals. It appeared that the powder on their father's body came from this bottle of chemicals. Conrad recalled that his injuries may have been related to Megan throwing several objects at him before she left. However, Megan was not concerned about her father's health. She continued to call Conrad several times, trying to get his PIN, but received no response. Although she had paid for his beauty services, her frustration increased when she still could not reach him. Megan did not understand that her father was facing serious health problems and had been hospitalized. When her friend informed her of this, she misunderstood the situation and thought he was simply drunk. By this point, doctors had assessed Conrad's condition and discovered he had suffered severe chemical burns. Unfortunately, the hospital did not have the equipment necessary to treat such serious injuries, so they considered transferring him to a better-equipped facility. Austin called his mother and asked her to check Conrad's house again, as he needed to stay in the hospital. When Julia arrived, she was once again shocked by the state of the house while searching for a cell phone. During this time, the doctors ran some tests. They found that his blood alcohol level was very high. Despite being in the hospital for a long time, Conrad was still very drunk. It is difficult to imagine what his blood alcohol level was the morning he spoke to Megan. He explained the situation, but did not remember anything and gave inconsistent statements. Before Conrad was taken to the new hospital, 3 police officers spoke with him. They gathered all the information they had, including the suspicion that Megan had used a white powder to intentionally harm her father. While one officer stayed behind to talk to Conrad, the other officers went to look for Megan. Julie informed the officers of the location where Megan was supposed to be celebrating her birthday, and several officers went there. Around 12:15, police spotted a car with several teenagers inside, including Megan. They took her out of the car to ask her some questions about the incident. During questioning, Megan hesitantly confessed that she may have thrown some chemicals at her father. She suggested that she may have accidentally thrown water, which then caused a chemical reaction. As a result, the police had to arrest her and take her to the police station. Conrad allowed police to search his home, where they discovered a bottle of white powder, a highly alkaline product used to clear particularly stubborn blockages. Megan was charged with assault with intent to cause serious bodily injury and 1 count of domestic violence. She was released on $75,000 bail, but she was unable to pay it and remains in jail. Meanwhile, Conrad is in pain in the hospital, and surgeons consider his condition to be serious. They need to treat multiple wounds and remove dead tissue to make way for new skin. Conrad underwent multiple surgeries and suffered from several infections. He also had difficulty speaking, which required a tracheotomy. This was due to his long-term exposure to chemical fumes, which damaged his lungs. He also required dialysis, and his condition continued to deteriorate rapidly. As a result, doctors decided that amputation was necessary. At this point, the Conrad had been suffering for over 5 months, and doctors still couldn't find an effective treatment. Conrad's mental state worsened, and he often requested to be taken off life support to alleviate his pain. More than anything, he wanted to go home. He was eventually discharged and allowed to return home, where some relatives visited him. Unfortunately, just 3 days after coming home, he died due to complications, which occurred on March 6, 2022. Forensic experts determined that his death was caused by poisoning from chemical reagents that harmed his lungs and kidneys. As a result, the charges against Megan were upgraded to murder. She was also charged with the negligent handling of hazardous chemicals that led to his death. The Megan spent nearly 15 months in prison before her trial started. The first hearing took place on June 12, 2023. During the trial, relatives and friends of the Conrad shared their testimonies. Their accounts were similar, which reinforced the credibility of the events being reconstructed. They expressed their belief that Megan did not intentionally kill her father. They emphasized that Megan loved her alcoholic father, Conrad, and took care of him. However, that day, in a fit of anger that he might ruin her birthday, she threw things at him without realizing exactly what she was throwing or the potential consequences of her actions. The prosecution has a different view of the situation. They believe that Megan intentionally collected the chemicals with the intention of harming her father. They argue that this was premeditated rather than impulsive. The prosecution questioned how the Megan could have randomly found the chemicals and water that led to such a reaction. The prosecution believes that Megan poured out the reagents and then added water, which caused the chemical reaction. Megan's defense attorneys countered the allegations. They argued that Conrad was on the wet couch due to a urinary problem and that Megan did not need to throw water at him. They suggested that she may not have even done that, as she seemed uncertain when speaking to the police. They also argued that the chemical could have been thrown accidentally, and that Conrad's burns could have been caused by lying on the wet couch. A major problem arose during the trial. When the police initially found a bottle of chemicals, they did not collect fingerprints from the bottle as evidence. This mistake left a significant gap in the evidence, making it difficult for the prosecutor's office to prove exactly what Megan threw at Conrad. It is possible that the chemical was there by accident and not due to any wrongdoing on her part. Additionally, the burns on the Conrad's skin suggested that the alkali was actually rubbed into it. If Megan had done this, she would have been injured as well, but there were no gloves or protective equipment found in the house, and her hands showed no signs of burns. Alkali practically does not react with cold water at room temperature. It takes a long time for it to begin to damage the skin, and only with hot water does it react almost immediately. According to the lawyers, everything indicates that the Megan must have deliberately poured hot water into the bottle and thrown it at her father. However, all the circumstances of the case indicate the opposite, which means that she did not harm her father. After Megan left, there was serious consideration that someone else might have caused Conrad severe injuries. Suspicion fell particularly on Austin due to his odd behavior on the day of the incident and his strained relationship with his father and other family members. On July 15, 2023, a jury found Megan Emirovich guilty, but the final decision rested with the judge, who scheduled a verdict hearing in 10 days. The verdict was controversial. Some believe that Megan intentionally killed her father, while others believe it was a coincidence. Megan herself claimed that she had no idea that mixing certain chemicals with water could lead to someone's death. On July 25, 2023, during a heartfelt speech in her defense, Megan apologized, expressed her longing for her father, and insisted that she never intended to hurt him. Megan admitted that she was unclear about what she had thrown at him. She requested the judge's understanding and support to help her pursue her dreams, which include earning a degree in marine biology and developing programs to assist children with depression, aiming to make a positive impact in the world. The Megan asserted that she does not pose a threat to society. The judge decided to give 15-year-old Megan another chance by sentencing her to just 1 year in prison and 5 years of probation. Megan and her lawyers were pleasantly surprised by this lenient sentence. Her mother and sisters supported her, believing she would start serving her sentence right away. However, she was released because she had already spent more time in jail than her sentence required. The prosecutor's office was unhappy with the verdict and requested that Megan be placed under house arrest, but the court denied this request, allowing her to move freely without any GPS monitoring. Hi everyone. Thanks for returning. Let's unravel another horrible case. The case of Veronica Youngblood. 30 years old, Veronica Youngblood originally came from Argentina. The exact timing of her move to the United States is unclear, but she grew up in poverty. At the young age of 16, she gave birth to her first daughter, Sharon. At that time, she started working as a call girl to support herself and earn money. In 2007, she met Ronald Youngblood, a pilot in the U.S. Navy, who was one of her clients. They quickly started dating, and in 2009, they got married in Las Vegas. Marrying Ronald brought stability to Veronica's life, offering her a home, a supportive husband, and assistance in caring for her daughter. A few years later, in 2012, Veronica and Ronald welcomed a daughter together named Brooklyn. Sharon is described as a sweet and kind girl who is always willing to help others. She is currently in 10th grade at Octina High School and participates in figure skating. Coach Lynette Carroll, who has coached she for about 4 years, commented that she is a persistent and hardworking athlete who has performed well in competitions. Sharon was a good student, with a bright future ahead of her. She often talks about her dream of becoming a singer and has a great group of friends, which makes her popular. Brooklyn, 5, is a smart, loving little girl who loves animals. She is adored by her family. However, the relationship between her parents, Veronica and Ronald, is strained. They often argued, which prompted the police to intervene. In 2014, while Ronald and his family were in Honduras, she called the local police to report that she and Ronald had a disagreement, during which he became physically violent. During this time, the family said Ronald began to suspect Veronica of having an affair. After that, their relationship deteriorated, and some people said he became more domineering, jealous, and possessive. They said that while in Honduras, he began denying his wife access to transportation, money, and even the internet. At one point, Veronica sought assistance from the U.S. Embassy to facilitate her emergency return to the United States, which was granted. After their time in Honduras, Ronald was assigned to the Navy Department in Washington, D.C., and they moved to Florida. There, they effectively separated, but continued to live together. Following their time in Florida, they relocated with their children to Oakton, Virginia, and began divorce proceedings. They continued to live in the same house though, possibly because they wanted to raise their 2 daughters together and because Veronica was unemployed, so could not afford to live independently. However, the divorce proceedings and child custody battle put further strain on their relationship. During this process, Veronica applied for student loans and named Ronald as a guarantor without his consent. This led to a number of disputes. By September 2016, the court decided that they could continue living together in Oakton and have joint custody of their daughter Brooklyn, without either party having to pay alimony. In October 2016, Ronald filed for a protective order to protect himself from Veronica. He alleged that she took his phone and threw it in the toilet, poured water on his laptop, and scratched his car. As a result, the court ordered she to move out of their shared home and maintain a distance of 500 feet from Ronald and Brooklyn until a hearing, scheduled for 2 weeks later. The hearing was finalized on October 31, 2016, and the divorce was finalized. After the hearing, Veronica most likely moved back into the marital home because she and Ronald began living together again. Everything went smoothly until March 2018, when Ronald and Veronica failed to appear in court. They filed a joint consent form for a 14 years project that stated they both wanted to move to Sedalia, Missouri, with their 2 daughters, Sharon and Brooklyn, in August 2018. They chose Missouri because that's where most of Ronald's family lives. The agreement that the two signed and filed with the court stated that Veronica would be given her own apartment, 30 miles away from Ronald's home, and that he would be responsible for paying rent for the next 3 years. During this period, they would share joint custody of their daughter, Brooklyn. The court approved this arrangement, and the move was planned. However, on April 13, 2018, she changed her mind about moving, hired a new lawyer, and sought to change the custody agreement. She explained that her situation had changed since the initial agreement was filed. Veronica said she had gotten a good-paying job and would work full-time, but to do this, she needed to stay in Virginia. She also said that she was in the process of buying her own home so that she could live independently of Ronald without his support. In her revised request, she sought full custody of Brooklyn, with the intention of letting their daughter live with her. The dispute between Ronald and Veronica was adjudicated in July 2018. The decision was made that there was no change. Both parties still had to move to Missouri as previously agreed. By August 2018, the judge refused to change the decision, and both parties signed this document to agree. 10 days later, Ronald notified the court of his new address in Missouri, where he planned to move in mid-August 2018. Sadly, this move would never take place. On August 5, 2018, 911 operator Jennifer Hoffman received a call from a 15-year-old girl who was crying out in pain. Sharon pleaded for help, saying she has just been attacked. When Jennifer asked who attacked her, she responded, her mother, Veronica. Sharon said her mother came into room while she and her younger sister, Brooklyn, were sleeping. Her mother said she was going to take her to God, then attacked her. Jennifer tried to reassure Sharon, informing her that help was on the way and to stay calm. However, Jennifer then heard the girl screaming and moaning in pain, repeatedly pleading. She said she didn't want to die. Please help her. Finally, in the evening, the rescue team arrived at the apartment on Lincoln Street. They found Sharon alive, with 2 wounds, one in the back and one in the chest. Tragically, her little sister Brooklyn was discovered dead in her bed due to injury to the head. Sharon was still alive at the time, but in critical condition. She was rushed to the hospital, but unfortunately, she did not survive. She fought bravely, but died just a few days later. When police arrived at the scene, they did not find Ronald or Veronica. Later that evening, they located Veronica. She went to a friend's house and knocked on the door, with a gun in her hand. Her friend called 911, leading to her swift detention. Upon her arrest, officers discovered she still had the gun with her and was driving a rental car. The police also found 2 ammunition magazines for the weapon. During her interrogation just a few hours later, Veronica confessed that she had bought the gun with plans to kill her daughters, Ronald and Veronica. Then she will die too. She mentioned that she was unhappy with her life, but did not elaborate further. The police later learned that immediately after the shootings, she called Ronald to inform him that she had killed their daughters, and she intended to die as well, adding that she hated him. During the police interrogation, Veronica confessed to her guilt. When the investigator asked what punishment she thought she deserved, she stated it should be the death penalty. Although Virginia has abolished the death penalty, the officers present during the interrogation noted that she spoke in a flat, emotionless manner throughout. As a result, she was charged with first-degree murder for the deaths of her 2 children. At her initial court hearing, she indicated that she did not require a public defender and did not want to hire a private attorney. However, eventually, she hired a lawyer. And at her plea hearing, she pleaded guilty, citing insanity. Veronica delayed each court hearing in her case. The next hearing was pushed back for several months because she repeatedly refused to leave prison to attend. Ultimately, the murder trial began in March 2023. Recently, the prosecution argued that she was not insane. Instead, they claimed she had carefully planned the murders of her daughters, Sharon and Brooklyn, as revenge against her ex-husband, Ronald. The murder occurred just days before Brooklyn and Ronald moved to Missouri. Veronica had just gone through a difficult divorce and was trying to get revenge. The prosecution presented a detailed timeline, demonstrating the premeditation behind the crimes. 9 days before the murders, Veronica attended a local gun show and purchased a gun. Prosecutors allege she did this with the intention of killing both her daughters, Sharon and Brooklyn. On the day before the shootings, Sharon asked Veronica if her mother had planned to kill her and Brooklyn, and if so, that would be horrible. The prosecution contended that Veronica had been plotting the murders for several days. On the day of the crime, they claimed she gave both children chewing gum laced with sleeping pills to incapacitate them. She then went into each room and attacked each of his daughters. During the investigation, it was discovered that Veronica had attacked Brooklyn in the head, causing her instant death. For Sharon, after the first attack, little girl woke up and started screaming. She asked her mother why she had shot her, and her mother replied that little girl was going to see God. Veronica then struck her again in the chest and left the apartment. Finally, Veronica called Ronald and left a voice message saying, "She killed Brooklyn, she killed Sharon, and she will die. She hates him. Goodbye." The prosecution alleged that Veronica was a liar and a manipulator. They said she caused chaos, and shirked responsibility for her own gain. They described her as cruel, selfish, vengeful, and calculating. They claimed that she planned and executed the murder plot to get revenge on her ex-husband, Ronald. The defense, on the other hand, argued that she was suffering from psychological problems. They said she had been abused by a cruel man who had physically and mentally abused her. The defense claimed that Ronald never loved her and that she had suffered abuse since childhood. The lawyers again pointed to the poverty that Veronica and her younger sister lived in. They said she had suffered abuse from her grandfather and daily beatings from her parents, to the point where she was at one point unable to walk. Her father would often beat her with tree branches, belts, and brooms. After years of living in such cruel conditions, her parents abandoned she and her younger sister without a word, leaving them to fend for themselves. Then, Veronica was forced to turn to sex work to provide for her daughter and support her sister. During the proceedings, her younger sister gave a statement in which mentions that since childhood, she has followed a South American religion called Umbanda. This religion believes in the existence of a supreme creator, the ability to communicate with the spirits of the dead, and the concept of reincarnation, spiritual growth through various practices. The defense used this information to argue that Veronica believed she had the ability to communicate with the dead. The defense argued that Veronica had suffered abuse and neglect in her past, and that in addition to these factors, she suffered from severe mental illness. She reported having heard voices throughout her life. At trial, she claimed that she had heard voices that night, leading her to believe that she had to kill her daughters. The defense argued that she suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder and depression. They asserted that she was terrified that her children would experience the same abuse she endured as a child if they were separated from her. Veronica's defense team said she went to the police and asked for the death penalty. This shows that she intends to die. During the trial, various witnesses, including doctors who attempted to save Sharon's life and people who knew Veronica, Ronald during their marriage, provided testimony. One of the witnesses was Manuel, a defense attorney, who met Veronica by chance at the time of the incident. He shared that they met in the summer of 2018, and when they first met, she seemed calm and composed. However, by the end of July, things had changed. Manuel said that in late July, Veronica shared with him that she had lost her nursing job, which would have prevented her from moving to Missouri, as she had said in court. During their conversations, she expressed a desire for a more serious relationship, but he responded that he was not ready for a serious relationship. Therefore, the two decided to end their relationship at that time. A few days later, she sent him a text claiming she was pregnant with his child. On July 31st, he visited her home to discuss the pregnancy. Upon arrival, he noticed the apartment was dark, lit only by candles, which created a romantic atmosphere. Although they talked, but he soon left because he felt unsafe. He said that after that conversation, he no longer trusted Veronica's word about her pregnancy. He didn't believe anything she said. It is highly unlikely that she was pregnant, as there were no reports from the prison indicating that she had given birth or experienced a miscarriage. After their conversation, Manuel instructed his lawyer to send Veronica a letter, telling her not to contact him again. He mentioned that he saw she again on August 5, when she appeared at his doorstep. She was calm and seemed cold, asking to come in. However, he refused to open the door and asked her to leave. Veronica advised Manuel to call the police, as they were looking for her. When he inquired why the police were looking for her, she revealed, because she just killed her daughters. At that point, she pulled a gun from her belt and explained her actions to him. Following this, he called 911 to report her location. During the trial, the focus turned to Sharon's 911 call, in which little girl told the dispatcher that she was dying because her mother had just attacked her. At that moment, Veronica stood up and cried out. Veronica couldn't take it anymore. The judge decided to adjourn the trial and informed the jury that Veronica had asked for a waiver because she had interrupted the hearing. Veronica then testified, with tears streaming down her face, about the trauma she had endured. The jury and several others in attendance were moved to tears as she shared the horrors of her life. Ronald attended the trial. He also took the stand to speak about how wonderful his daughters, Sharon and Brooklyn, were, expressing his deep love for them and his devastation over the incident. The prosecution's strong arguments convinced the jury to find Veronica guilty. She purchased the gun 9 days before the murder and had given her daughters sleeping medication beforehand, leaving them defenseless. This clearly indicated that she had planned the act well in advance. It was not a spontaneous decision made in a moment of madness. On the final day, she followed through with her plan, reinforcing that this was not an impulsive act. Veronica claimed that she was mentally ill and did not intend to commit the crime. She had endured abuse throughout her life, which contributed to her mental health struggles. She believed that her actions were meant to protect her daughters from the same abuse she experienced as a child. After a 2-week trial, the jury began their deliberations and returned the next day with a verdict. They determined that Veronica was not insane at the time of the crime and found her guilty of first-degree murder for the deaths of Brooklyn and Sharon, as well as for using a firearm during the commission of the crime. During the sentencing phase, the jury decided that prison was the appropriate consequence for Veronica. Upon hearing her sentence, Veronica reacted with anger, shouting, "No, no," and leaping from her chair. Court officials had to escort her out of the courtroom. Then, she was taken back to prison, under special surveillance. A few days later, the jury returned to impose a sentence of 36 years in prison for each murder and an additional 3 years for each firearm offense. In total, Veronica will serve 78 years in prison. Throughout their relationship, Ronald and Veronica both caused each other harm. She may have had some psychological issues, believing that harming her daughters would get back at her ex-husband, Ronald. However, he is not without fault either, and many of Veronica's past experiences likely shaped her personality and her relationship with he. If Veronica feared her daughters would suffer the same abuse she endured as a child, it's important to note that she had full custody of Sharon, and only Brooklyn had to leave. She needed to move to Missouri, a plan she had agreed upon with Ronald. If she had followed through with this move, Brooklyn would not have been so far away from her.